You have been lied to about your mind. They told you peace comes when every thought becomes quiet, when every feeling finally makes sense, and when every broken part of you disappears. But if that were true, why do you still feel like you are fighting yourself? Why do you keep arguing with your own thoughts, judging your own emotions, and treating your mind like something you must defeat? The truth is, self-reconciliation is not about winning a war inside your head. It is about ending one. It is the art of sitting with your mind without attacking it, listening without becoming trapped, and allowing your thoughts to be there without letting them rule your life. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will begin to soften. The fight will lose its grip. The noise will stop feeling like an enemy. And slowly, you will learn how to return to yourself, not with shame, not with fear, but with understanding. This is not just a lesson about thinking better. This is the art of self-reconciliation, how to stop fighting your mind. Are you ready? Let's begin. For a long time, you may have believed that peace would finally arrive the moment you fixed your mind, the moment you stopped overthinking, the moment you removed every dark thought, every fear, every contradiction, and every uncomfortable emotion. But what if the real reason you feel exhausted is not because your mind is broken, but because you have been fighting a war inside yourself every single day without realizing it? Something strange happens when a person becomes afraid of their own thoughts. The mind stops feeling like a home and starts feeling like a battlefield. Every emotion becomes suspicious. Every uncomfortable idea feels dangerous. Every moment of sadness feels like proof that something is wrong with you. And slowly, without noticing it, you begin spending your entire life trying to repair every thought that enters your head. The painful part is that most people do not even realize they are doing this. They think they are being responsible. They think they are becoming mentally strong. They think they are fixing themselves. But in reality, they are trapped in a hidden war that never ends. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. It comes from constantly monitoring your own mind, from waking up every day and immediately checking your emotional weather like a frightened guard standing at the gate of a city under attack. Am I okay today? Why do I feel this way? What if this thought means something bad about me? Why can't I stop thinking about this? Why am I still anxious? Why am I not healed yet? And just like that, the war begins again before the day has even fully started. Many people spend years trying to force themselves into inner perfection. They believe every thought must be positive, every emotion must be controlled, every fear must be removed immediately. But the human mind was never designed to be silent all the time. It was never meant to behave like a machine that only produces calm and rational thoughts. Your mind is alive. It reacts, it remembers, it protects, it worries, it imagines, it predicts danger, it replays pain, it searches for meaning. Sometimes it whispers wisdom, sometimes it panics for no reason at all. And one of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that every thought deserves to be treated like a serious message. A person can think something frightening and immediately believe they must analyze it. Another person feels anger and instantly believes they are becoming a bad human being. Someone remembers an embarrassing moment from 10 years ago, and suddenly their body reacts as if it happened this morning. The problem is not always the thought itself. The problem is the war that begins afterward. Because once you start fighting every thought, your mind learns something dangerous. It learns that thoughts are threats. And the moment the brain believes thoughts are dangerous, it begins producing even more of them. This is one of the strangest truths about the human mind. The harder you try to force a thought away, the stronger it often becomes. Psychologists sometimes call this the ironic process theory. In simple words, when you desperately try not to think about something, your brain keeps checking to see if the thought is gone. But in checking for the thought, it accidentally keeps bringing the thought back. It is like trying not to think about a red door. The moment someone says, "Do not picture a red door," your mind immediately creates the image. Not because you are broken, but because that is how the mind works. Now apply this to fear. A person says, "I must stop feeling anxious." Suddenly the brain becomes obsessed with checking for anxiety. Another says, "I cannot think negatively." Now the brain constantly scans for negative thoughts. Someone else says, "I should not feel sad anymore." And now sadness becomes the center of attention every hour of the day. The war grows stronger because the resistance grows stronger. This is why some people become trapped inside endless self-improvement without ever finding peace. They are always fixing, correcting, analyzing, repairing, controlling, monitoring, and fighting themselves. Even rest becomes another project to succeed at. Even healing becomes another standard to fail. They cannot simply sit quietly with themselves because every silence becomes an investigation. And eventually the mind becomes tired. Not weak, not defective, just tired. Tired of being interrogated every moment of the day. There are people who smile in public while secretly living inside mental combat. They look calm on the outside, but internally they are constantly negotiating with their thoughts. They are trying to outthink every fear before it arrives, trying to prevent every emotional discomfort before it appears, trying to become mentally untouchable. But human beings were never meant to live that way. There is a massive difference between awareness and obsession. Awareness notices thoughts. Obsession tries to control every single one. And this hidden obsession often disguises itself as self-discipline. A person believes they are becoming mentally strong because they constantly criticize themselves. They think harsh self-monitoring will protect them from failure. They believe inner pressure will keep them safe from rejection or mistakes. But eventually they stop feeling alive. Their mind becomes a courtroom where every thought is placed on trial. You should not feel this. You should be over this already. Why are you still thinking like this? What is wrong with you? Normal people do not think this way. The saddest part is that many people speak to themselves with a cruelty they would never use on another human being. A friend could come to them in pain, confused, anxious, and exhausted, and they would respond with kindness. But when the same suffering appears inside their own mind, they respond with punishment. This is how inner wars survive for years, not because the mind is evil, but because the person has unknowingly turned against themselves. Sometimes the mind produces painful thoughts because it is trying to protect you from danger. Sometimes anxiety is an alarm system that became overactive after too much stress. Sometimes overthinking is the brain attempting to create certainty in an uncertain world. Sometimes emotional numbness is the nervous system trying to survive exhaustion. But instead of listening gently, people attack themselves for having these reactions at all, and that attack creates even more suffering than the original thought. There is also another hidden pain in trying to fix every thought. You begin losing trust in yourself. You stop experiencing your own mind naturally because everything becomes filtered through fear and correction. Even joy becomes suspicious. Even peace feels temporary. You begin waiting for the next bad thought like someone waiting for another storm after brief sunlight. This creates a nervous relationship with your own inner world. You no longer feel safe inside yourself. And when a person stops feeling safe within themselves, they often become addicted to distraction. Constant scrolling, constant noise, constant stimulation, constant productivity. Anything to avoid sitting alone with the mind they no longer trust. But avoidance does not heal the war. It only delays the confrontation. Eventually, the silence returns, and when it does, many people discover something heartbreaking. They have spent so much time trying to control their thoughts that they no longer know how to simply be with themselves. This is why self-reconciliation is so important, not self-perfection, not emotional control, reconciliation. Reconciliation means ending the war. It means realizing that thoughts are not enemies invading your mind. They are experiences passing through awareness. Some are useful, some are meaningless. Some are emotional echoes from old pain. Some are fears created by exhaustion. Some are random mental noise. But not every thought deserves panic. Not every thought deserves analysis. Not every thought deserves a fight. One of the quietest forms of wisdom is learning how to let a thought exist without immediately reacting to it. This does not mean becoming passive or careless. It means understanding that your mind sometimes produces storms that do not need to become identities. A fearful thought does not automatically mean you are weak. An angry thought does not automatically make you cruel. A strange thought does not automatically define your character. A doubtful thought does not automatically predict your future. Thoughts are not always truths. Sometimes they are weather patterns moving across the sky of the mind. And the moment you stop treating every cloud like a catastrophe, the inner world begins to calm down. There is something deeply healing about realizing you do not have to attend every argument your mind invites you into. You do not have to spend 3 hours trying to eliminate one uncomfortable emotion. You do not have to solve your entire life every time anxiety appears. You do not have to become mentally perfect before you deserve peace. Many people are waiting for complete inner certainty before allowing themselves to relax. But certainty is not how peace is found. Peace is found when you stop demanding impossible levels of control over your own humanity. Even Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic thinkers in history, struggled with his own thoughts. His private writings reveal someone constantly reminding himself how to think clearly, how to stay grounded, how to return to reason. Not because he was weak, but because being human means having an active and emotional mind. The goal was never to eliminate the mind. The goal was to stop becoming enslaved by it, and there is a difference. A person enslaved by the mind believes every thought instantly. They react to every fear. They obey every emotional impulse. Their inner world controls the direction of their entire life. But a reconciled person develops a gentler relationship with thought itself. They begin noticing thoughts instead of drowning inside them. They create space between awareness and reaction. They stop treating themselves like broken machines that need constant repair. And something beautiful starts happening in that space. Breathing becomes easier. Silence becomes less threatening. Emotions become less terrifying. The nervous system slowly learns that not every thought is an emergency. This does not happen overnight. Years of inner fighting do not disappear in one evening. But every time you choose observation over panic, compassion over punishment, presence over obsession, the war weakens a little more. You start becoming someone your own mind can finally rest beside. And perhaps this is what so many people secretly need most. Not another technique to control themselves, not another impossible standard, not another exhausting battle against their own thoughts, but permission to be human without turning humanity into failure. Because there is a version of peace that does not come from dominating the mind. It comes from no longer being afraid of it. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a very long time, you can stop trying to fix every thought that passes through you. Maybe you can simply let your mind breathe. Maybe you can sit quietly beside yourself without interrogation. Maybe you can understand that healing is not becoming thoughtless. It is becoming less hostile toward your own inner experience. The war does not end because every thought disappears. The war ends because you finally stop attacking yourself for having them. And once you begin to see that the war does not end by forcing every thought to disappear, another truth quietly rises to the surface. The mind does not become peaceful when it is threatened. It becomes louder, it becomes more restless, it becomes more desperate to be heard. This is where many people get trapped without knowing it, because the harder they attack their own mind, the more their mind seems to shout back. There is a painful kind of noise that comes from being at war with yourself. It is not always loud on the outside. You may still smile, answer messages, go to work, cook food, talk to people, and look perfectly fine. But inside, there is a constant pressure, as if your own thoughts are knocking against a locked door, begging for attention. And the more you say, "Go away," the harder they knock. This is one of the hidden reasons your mind becomes louder when you treat it like an enemy. A thought that feels rejected does not always leave. Sometimes it returns with more force. A feeling that is pushed away does not always disappear. Sometimes it grows teeth. A fear that is mocked, hated, or buried does not always become silent. Sometimes it learns to speak in the only way it can, through tension, overthinking, tiredness, irritation, and that heavy feeling in your chest that seems to arrive for no clear reason. The strange part is this. Most people do not attack their mind because they hate themselves. They do it because they are tired. They are tired of the same fears, tired of the same memories, tired of the same doubts, tired of waking up with noise in their head when all they wanted was one peaceful morning. So they begin to treat the mind like a bad roommate. They argue with it, they shame it, they command it. They say, "Stop thinking like this, stop feeling like this, stop being so weak, stop ruining everything." But the mind does not become calm under insult. It becomes afraid. And when the mind becomes afraid, it does not relax. It starts searching for danger. It starts scanning your life like a guard who has been told an enemy is hiding somewhere. It checks your past. It checks your future. It checks your relationships. It checks your body. It checks your tone of voice. It checks what someone meant by one small sentence 3 days ago. Before long, the mind that you wanted to silence becomes busier than ever. Not because it wants to destroy you, but because it thinks it is trying to protect you. This is why self-reconciliation is so different from self-control. Control says, "Be quiet, or else." Reconciliation says, "I hear you, but you do not have to scream." Control creates pressure. Reconciliation creates safety. And the human mind, like the human body, calms down faster when it feels safe. Think of a frightened child. If a child is crying in a dark room, shouting at the child to stop crying may make the sound louder. Not because the child is trying to be difficult, but because fear grows when it feels alone. The child does not need punishment first. The child needs presence. The same thing happens inside you. There are parts of your mind that are not trying to ruin your life. They are crying in the dark. They are old fears, old disappointments, old patterns, old wounds, old survival habits that never learned the danger was over. But instead of sitting with them, many people drag them into court. They ask, "Why are you here again? What is wrong with you? Why can't you just be normal? Why do you always make everything harder?" And every question carries the same hidden message. You are unwanted here. That message is what makes the mind louder, because what is rejected often fights to be recognized. What is shamed often hides, then returns in another form. What is feared often grows in the shadows, and what is misunderstood often repeats itself until someone finally listens. This does not mean every thought is wise. It does not mean every fear is true. It does not mean every emotional reaction deserves control over your decisions. But it does mean that fighting the mind blindly often creates the very noise you are trying to escape. There are people who believe their mind is attacking them, when in reality their mind is overloaded. It has carried too much for too long. Too many unfinished conversations. Too many swallowed feelings. Too many moments where they said, "I'm fine," when they were not fine. Too many times they had to stay strong because there was no room to fall apart. And then one day the mind becomes loud, and instead of asking what it has been carrying, they accuse it of being broken. But a loud mind is not always a broken mind. Sometimes it is a crowded mind. Sometimes it is a tired mind. Sometimes it is a mind full of emotions that were never given a safe place to land. You may notice this at night. During the day, noise keeps you busy. Responsibilities distract you. People need you. Your phone keeps calling your attention. But when night comes and the world becomes quiet, the mind finally finds space to speak. And because it has been ignored all day, it does not whisper gently. It brings everything at once: the regret, the worry, the memory, the fear, the question, the future, the mistake, the possibility that something is wrong. And you may think, why is my mind doing this to me? But perhaps the better question is, what has my mind been trying to tell me that I keep refusing to hear? This question changes everything, because the moment you stop treating your mind like an enemy, curiosity replaces hostility. You stop entering your inner world with a weapon. You begin entering it with a lamp. You are no longer trying to destroy what you find. You are trying to understand why it is there. And understanding has a quiet power. A thought that once felt terrifying may become less powerful when you recognize it as fear, not prophecy. A memory that once felt like punishment may become a sign that something in you still needs kindness. A doubt that once felt like proof of weakness may become evidence that you care deeply about making the right choice. A repeated worry may not be madness at all. It may be your nervous system asking for steadiness. The mind becomes louder when it is treated like an enemy, because enemies must be watched. Enemies must be controlled. Enemies must be defeated. So if you label your own mind as an enemy, you create a relationship of constant surveillance. You start watching every thought to see if it will betray you. You become suspicious of your own emotions. You become afraid of silence. You become afraid of rest. You become afraid of being alone with yourself. And that fear becomes fuel. Now, the mind has two problems. First, the original thought or feeling. Second, your fear of having it. This second layer is often heavier than the first. Sadness becomes, why am I sad? Anxiety becomes, what if I never become peaceful? Anger becomes, does this mean I am a bad person? Doubt becomes, what if I cannot trust myself? A simple human feeling becomes a whole identity crisis because you did not allow it to exist without judgment. This is how the mind grows louder, not from the first feeling alone, but from the battle against the feeling. And this is where many people misunderstand peace. They think peace means having no unwanted thoughts, but peace often begins when unwanted thoughts stop feeling like emergencies. Peace begins when you can say, this is uncomfortable, but I do not have to panic. Peace begins when you can notice the storm without becoming the storm. Peace begins when the mind is allowed to speak without being handed the steering wheel. There is great wisdom in learning how to respond to your mind without obeying every message it sends. You can hear fear and still choose courage. You can hear doubt and still take the next small step. You can hear regret and still refuse to build your whole identity around yesterday. You can hear the critic and still answer it with patience. This is not weakness. This is inner leadership. Because true inner strength is not shouting over the mind until it becomes quiet. True inner strength is being able to sit in the room with your own thoughts without being controlled by them. It is saying, I know you are loud right now, but I am still here. I am listening. I am not running. I am not surrendering my life to you either. That is a very different kind of power. Many people have spent years trying to dominate their inner world. They want to become so strong that nothing affects them. No fear, no sadness, no insecurity, no painful memory. But this idea of strength can become another cage. Because if you believe strength means never being disturbed, then every disturbance feels like failure. Every emotional wave becomes proof that you are not healed. Every anxious thought becomes evidence that you have lost progress. But what if strength is not the absence of inner noise? What if strength is the ability to remain kind and steady while the noise is there? This is the beginning of emotional maturity, not the cold kind that pretends not to feel, the real kind, the kind that says, "My mind is active today, but I do not have to hate it. My emotions are moving today, but I do not have to fear them. My thoughts are loud today, but I do not have to become cruel to myself." The mind becomes louder when it is treated like an enemy, because hostility awakens defense. If someone speaks to you with contempt, your body tenses. If someone accuses you unfairly, your heart reacts. If someone refuses to understand you, you either shut down or fight back. Why would your inner world be any different? When you attack your mind, something inside you tightens. The nervous system hears danger. The body joins the battle. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your jaw clenches. Your shoulders rise. Your stomach turns. Then you think the physical tension proves something is terribly wrong. But sometimes your body is simply reacting to the way you are treating yourself. A harsh inner voice can become a stressful environment, and you live inside that environment every day. This is why gentleness is not a soft luxury. It is a serious form of healing. Gentleness tells the nervous system, "We are not under attack right now." It tells the mind, "You do not have to scream to be heard." It tells the heart, "You are allowed to feel without being punished." Over time, this changes the whole inner atmosphere. But gentleness does not mean letting every thought run wild. It means changing the tone of the relationship. You can set boundaries with your mind without violence. You can say, "I hear this worry, but I will not spend the entire night feeding it." You can say, "This thought is here, but I do not need to solve it at midnight." You can say, "This feeling is painful, but I will not insult myself for having it." That is not avoidance. That is wise containment. There is a difference between listening and drowning. Listening means you allow the mind to reveal what is present. Drowning means you lose yourself inside everything it says. Self-reconciliation requires the first, not the second. You are not learning to believe every thought. You are learning to stop attacking the fact that thoughts appear. This is a rare skill because most people swing between two extremes. They either obey the mind completely or try to silence it completely. They either believe every fear or reject every feeling. But peace lives in the middle. Peace says, "I can hear you without becoming you. I can notice you without fighting you. I can allow you without obeying you." When you practice this, the mind slowly learns that it does not need to use force. It does not need to repeat the same fear 50 times. It does not need to bring the same memory every night. It does not need to shout to get your attention, because finally, there is someone inside listening with steadiness. This is why some thoughts soften when met with compassion. Not because compassion magically erases them, but because it removes the panic around them. A thought wrapped in fear becomes heavy. A thought met with calm becomes lighter. The thought may still be there, but its grip changes. You may have experienced this with another person. Sometimes when someone listens to you without judging, the problem does not even need to be solved immediately. You simply feel lighter because you are no longer alone with it. The same thing can happen inside you. When you stop abandoning yourself during difficult thoughts, something begins to settle. The mind becomes loudest when it believes it must fight for survival. And many of your mental patterns were born in survival. Maybe you learned to overthink because mistakes once cost you love, peace, or safety. Maybe you learned to expect rejection because people disappointed you before. Maybe you learned to criticize yourself because you thought it would protect you from being criticized by others. Maybe you learned to stay alert because calm once felt unsafe. These patterns may be painful now, but at some point they were trying to help. This does not mean you must keep them forever. It means you do not have to hate the part of you that created them. You can outgrow a pattern without despising the version of you that needed it. You can say, "Thank you for trying to protect me, but I do not need this much fear anymore." You can say, "I understand why you became loud, but we are learning a new way now." This is the language of reconciliation, not "shut up," not "go away," not "what is wrong with me," but "I understand why you are here, and I will not let you control everything." There is deep freedom in that sentence, because many people are not suffering only from their thoughts. They are suffering from the belief that having those thoughts makes them unacceptable. They are not only anxious, they are ashamed of being anxious. They are not only sad, they are embarrassed by their sadness. They are not only doubtful, they are angry at themselves for doubting. So the mind becomes a place where every feeling is followed by punishment, and punishment never creates safety. It creates hiding. Parts of you begin to hide from your own awareness. Pain becomes disguised as irritability. Fear becomes disguised as control. Loneliness becomes disguised as independence. Exhaustion becomes disguised as productivity. And because the real feeling is not welcomed, it finds other ways to speak. That is why treating the mind like an enemy can make life confusing. You are not hearing the real message anymore. You are only hearing the distorted sound of emotions that had to disguise themselves to survive your judgment. But when you soften, the truth becomes easier to hear. You may discover that beneath your anger was hurt. Beneath your overthinking was a need for security. Beneath your control was fear of losing what matters. Beneath your self-criticism was a desperate wish to become better. Beneath your restlessness was grief you never gave time to breathe. And when you understand this, the mind stops looking like a monster. It starts looking like a messenger. Again, not every message must be followed. Some messages are old, some are exaggerated, some are shaped by fear. Some are not useful for the life you are building now, but when you stop attacking the messenger, you can finally read the message clearly. This is how peace becomes possible, not by crushing the mind, but by changing your position toward it. You move from enemy to witness, from judge to listener, from fighter to guide, from jailer to caretaker, and little by little, your inner world becomes less hostile. There will still be loud days. There will still be nights when your thoughts come knocking. There will still be moments when an old fear rises and tries to convince you that nothing has changed. But you will not meet it the same way. You will not immediately become violent toward yourself. You will not turn one hard moment into a final verdict on your healing. You will breathe. You will notice. You will make room. You will answer with steadiness. And maybe for the first time, your mind will begin to trust you. That is one of the most beautiful parts of self-reconciliation. You are not only learning to trust your mind is learning to trust you. It is learning that you will not attack it every time it brings discomfort. It is learning that you will not abandon yourself when fear appears. It is learning that you can handle difficult thoughts without turning them into a war. And when the mind trusts you, it does not need to shout as much. The noise may not vanish all at once, but it begins to lose its sharpness. The same thoughts may pass through, but they do not cut as deeply. The same worries may arise, but they do not command your whole body. The same memories may appear, but they do not drag you back into the past with the same force. This is not because you defeated the mind. It is because you stopped threatening it. A person does not become peaceful by becoming empty inside. A person becomes peaceful by becoming safe inside, safe enough to feel without panic, safe enough to think without spiraling, safe enough to remember without collapsing, safe enough to be human without turning every inner movement into a problem. So when your mind becomes loud, do not rush to call it your enemy. Pause. Let there be a little space. Ask yourself, what is this noise trying to protect? What is it afraid I will not notice? What pain is asking for attention beneath this thought? These questions do not make you weak. They make you wise, because the mind that is treated with war becomes a battlefield. But the mind that is treated with patient understanding can become a place of return. And as this lesson settles into you, carry this truth gently. Your mind is not always trying to hurt you. Sometimes it is trying, in its confused and frightened way, to bring you back to something that needs care. The answer is not to attack it harder. The answer is to become the kind of presence that your own thoughts no longer need to scream for. That is where the volume begins to lower. That is where the fight begins to loosen. That is where you stop living as a guard inside your own head and begin living as a friend within yourself. And after a person stops treating the mind like an enemy, another quiet transformation begins to unfold. The thoughts may still appear, the fears may still visit, old memories may still knock at the door at strange hours of the night, but something inside starts changing. There is suddenly a little more space between the thought and the reaction, a little more breathing room between the noise and the panic. And this is where one of the rarest forms of peace begins to enter a human life, the ability to listen without immediately believing. Most people never learn this skill. The moment a thought appears, they accept it as truth. If the mind says, "You are failing," they feel defeated. If the mind says, "Something bad is going to happen," they begin preparing for disaster. If the mind says, "You are not enough," they carry the weight of shame as if it were reality carved into stone. But the human mind is not a perfect narrator. It is influenced by fear, exhaustion, memory, stress, insecurity, past pain, biology, loneliness, and survival instincts. Sometimes it tells the truth clearly. Other times it speaks through distortion. And one of the deepest forms of suffering happens when a person cannot tell the difference between a thought and a fact. There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from believing every sentence your mind whispers to you. It turns daily life into emotional quicksand. A simple mistake becomes proof that your whole future is collapsing. One awkward conversation becomes evidence that everyone secretly dislikes you. One difficult season becomes a prediction that happiness will never return. And because thoughts move so quickly, many people never pause long enough to question them. They react instantly. The thought appears, and the body obeys. Fear rises, and the heart races. Doubt appears, and confidence disappears. Shame arrives, and the shoulders become heavy. It all happens so fast that the person assumes the thought must be true simply because it feels powerful. But feelings are not always facts. This is one of the hardest truths for many people to accept because emotions can feel incredibly convincing. Anxiety feels like danger, shame feels like truth, regret feels permanent, fear feels prophetic, but the intensity of a feeling does not automatically make it accurate. A tired mind can create dark conclusions. A lonely heart can assume abandonment where there is none. An anxious nervous system can mistake uncertainty for catastrophe. A wounded memory can replay old pain and present it as current reality. This is why listening without immediately believing is such a rare piece. It interrupts the automatic chain reaction between thought and suffering. A thought appears. You are falling behind in life. Before, you may have instantly believed it. Your chest tightens. You compare yourself to everyone else. You spiral into hopelessness. You spend the whole day feeling inadequate. But now something different happens. You pause. You notice the thought instead of merging with it completely. You ask quietly, "Is this actually true, or is this fear speaking?" And in that small moment of awareness, something powerful begins to happen. The thought loses some of its control over you, not because you forced it away, not because you argued aggressively with it, but because you stopped kneeling before every thought as if it were absolute truth. Many people have never experienced this kind of inner freedom. They have spent years living under the dictatorship of automatic thinking. Every mental sentence becomes an order, every fear becomes a command, every insecure thought becomes a final judgment about who they are. But thoughts are often temporary visitors shaped by temporary states. A hungry person thinks differently than a rested person. A frightened person thinks differently than a calm person. A person who has not slept well for weeks often sees life through darker lenses. A stressed nervous system creates different internal stories than a peaceful one. This means the mind is not always objective. It is deeply influenced by condition. Think about how different your thoughts become when you are overwhelmed compared to when you are emotionally safe. On difficult days, even small problems feel gigantic. A delayed message feels personal. A mistake feels unforgivable. The future feels doomed. But after rest, safety, connection, or time, those same thoughts may suddenly look less convincing. The situation did not completely change. Your inner state did. This alone should teach us something important. Thoughts are not always stable truths. They are often reflections of temporary emotional weather, and yet so many people build entire identities around passing mental storms. A person thinks, "I am unlovable," during a painful season and treats it as a permanent fact. Another thinks, "I will never heal," during a difficult night and assumes the future is already decided. Someone else thinks, "I always ruin everything," after one mistake and carries that sentence for years. The mind can create prisons out of temporary emotions when no one questions the thoughts entering the room. But listening without immediately believing creates a doorway out of those prisons. It allows you to observe the mind with curiosity instead of surrendering to it blindly. It teaches you that a thought can exist without becoming your identity. It reminds you that the mind produces stories constantly, but not all stories deserve authority. This is where many people misunderstand self-awareness. They think self-awareness means analyzing every thought endlessly. But true awareness is often quieter than that. It is the ability to notice thoughts without instantly becoming emotionally trapped inside them. There is wisdom in saying, "This thought is present, but I do not need to decide right now whether it is true." That sentence alone can calm enormous amounts of suffering, because urgency is one of the mind's favorite tricks. The mind often speaks with emotional intensity to convince you that immediate reaction is necessary. Fix this now. Panic now. Figure this out immediately. You must solve this tonight. But many thoughts lose power when they are given time instead of instant obedience. Sometimes a thought that feels terrifying at midnight becomes much smaller by morning. Not because you solved your entire life overnight, but because emotional intensity changed. The nervous system settled, the storm passed. This is why emotionally exhausted people often make harsh conclusions about themselves. The mind becomes less balanced under pressure. Fear becomes louder. Catastrophizing increases. Small uncertainties become enormous threats. And if you believe every thought during those moments, you can accidentally create suffering that did not need to exist. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus once said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." In simple words, suffering is often intensified not only by events themselves, but by the meaning the mind attaches to them. Two people can experience the same setback and interpret it completely differently. One sees failure and collapse. Another sees difficulty and growth. One sees rejection and worthlessness. Another sees incompatibility and redirection. The event matters, yes, but interpretation shapes emotional reality in powerful ways. This is why learning to pause before believing every thought can transform your entire inner life. A person who immediately believes every fearful thought becomes emotionally controlled by the mind's loudest moments. But a person who learns to observe thoughts carefully begins reclaiming inner steadiness. This does not mean becoming emotionally numb. It means becoming emotionally wise. Wise enough to know that the mind speaks differently when afraid. Wise enough to know that not every mental sentence deserves complete trust. Wise enough to know that thoughts can be influenced by trauma, insecurity, exhaustion, hormones, loneliness, grief, stress, or old conditioning. Wise enough to say, I hear this thought, but I will wait before deciding whether it deserves belief. That pause is sacred, because in that pause, you stop being a prisoner of automatic thinking. Many people confuse thoughts with intuition. But fear and intuition feel very different beneath the surface. Fear is usually urgent, chaotic, repetitive, and catastrophic. Intuition is often quieter, clearer, steadier. Fear screams. Intuition nudges. But when the mind is constantly noisy, it becomes difficult to hear the difference. This is another reason why reconciliation with the mind matters so deeply. When you stop reacting to every thought, the internal environment becomes less chaotic. You stop feeding mental panic with constant emotional fuel. Slowly, clarity becomes easier to recognize. There are people who spend years fighting thoughts they never needed to fear. A random intrusive thought appears, and they panic because they assume the thought reflects who they truly are. But the human brain produces countless strange thoughts every day. Psychologists have studied this extensively. Most people experience intrusive, irrational, bizarre, or disturbing thoughts from time to time. The difference is that emotionally healthy people do not automatically assign deep meaning to every passing mental image. But when someone becomes afraid of their own thoughts, the brain starts monitoring them constantly. What if this thought means something terrible? And now the thought becomes emotionally charged, not because it was deeply meaningful, but because fear attached itself to it. Again, the suffering grows less from the thought itself and more from the interpretation surrounding it. This is why listening without immediately believing creates such rare peace. It weakens the emotional glue between thought and identity. A thought says, "You are weak." Instead of collapsing into shame, you notice it, you breathe, you ask, is this objective truth, or is this the voice of exhaustion, comparison, or old criticism speaking through my mind right now? That question creates freedom, because now the thought is being examined instead of worshipped. And there is something profoundly healing about realizing you are allowed to question the mind, not aggressively, not with hostility, but with calm discernment. Children naturally believe every thought and feeling immediately. Emotional maturity involves learning that inner experiences are not always reliable narrators of reality. Just because something feels true in a painful moment does not mean it reflects the whole truth about your life. This understanding becomes especially important during emotional pain. When someone is grieving, the mind may whisper, "You will never feel joy again." When someone is heartbroken, the mind may say, "No one will ever love you." During depression, the mind often creates hopeless narratives about the future. During anxiety, the mind predicts disaster constantly. But emotional states heavily color perception. A frightened mind often sees frightening futures. A wounded mind often sees rejection everywhere. A tired mind often sees life as unbearable. And if you immediately believe those thoughts, suffering deepens. But if you can sit quietly and say, "This is what my mind is saying right now, but I do not need to build my whole reality around it," The emotional grip weakens. This is not denial, it is perspective. Perspective allows you to acknowledge inner experiences without becoming consumed by them. One of the most damaging habits many people develop is emotional fusion. This means becoming completely merged with thoughts and feelings until there is no separation left. I feel afraid, therefore danger must be real. I feel ashamed, therefore I must truly be worthless. I feel uncertain, therefore I must be failing. But awareness introduces separation. I notice fear. I notice shame. I notice uncertainty. Notice how different that feels. You are no longer becoming the emotion completely. You are observing it. That observation creates breathing space, and within that breathing space, peace has room to grow. Many spiritual traditions understood this long before modern psychology explained it scientifically. Buddhist teachings often describe thoughts as clouds passing through the sky of awareness. Stoic teachings encourage observing impressions before agreeing with them. Even modern cognitive therapy teaches that thoughts should be examined rather than automatically accepted. Across different philosophies and disciplines, the message remains similar. Thoughts are experiences, not commands, and this realization changes the way you move through life. You stop reacting impulsively to every mental storm. You stop making permanent decisions based on temporary emotional states. You stop treating every insecurity like prophecy. You stop assuming your darkest thoughts reveal your deepest truth. Instead, you become more grounded. You become slower to panic. You become gentler with yourself during difficult moments. This gentleness matters deeply because many people are terrified of their own mind. They believe if they stop controlling thoughts aggressively, everything will collapse. But often the opposite happens. When the mind is given room to breathe without immediate judgment, it becomes less frantic. A constantly judged mind becomes defensive. A constantly feared mind becomes louder. A constantly obeyed mind becomes chaotic. But a mind that is listened to carefully without instant belief begins settling naturally. This process takes practice. Years of automatic belief patterns do not disappear overnight. The brain has habits. It has emotional reflexes shaped by experience. If you spent years immediately believing self-critical thoughts, your nervous system may still react strongly at first. But every time you pause before attaching yourself to a thought, you weaken the old pattern slightly. Every time you observe fear without instantly surrendering to it, you strengthen inner steadiness. Every time you notice a catastrophic thought and say, "This may not be objective reality," you reclaim some freedom. And slowly, the relationship between you and your mind changes. You stop feeling hunted by your own thoughts. You stop living in constant emotional ambush. You stop feeling as though every negative thought must become your identity. Instead, thoughts become information to observe carefully rather than masters to obey blindly. This creates a much calmer internal world, not because painful thoughts vanish forever, but because you stop granting them total authority over your emotional life. There is another hidden piece here too. When you stop believing every thought immediately, you stop taking yourself to emotional extremes constantly. A single mistake no longer means you are a failure. A difficult day no longer means your life is ruined. An uncertain future no longer guarantees disaster. One uncomfortable emotion no longer defines your worth. This creates emotional balance. And emotional balance allows healing to happen more naturally, because healing struggles to grow inside constant panic. The nervous system needs moments of safety to repair itself. But if every fearful thought becomes an emergency, the body stays trapped in chronic stress. The mind remains hypervigilant. Rest becomes impossible. Listening without immediately believing interrupts that cycle. It allows the nervous system to say, maybe we are not in danger right now. That sentence alone can soften years of inattention. There is great courage in not reacting instantly to fear, great wisdom in allowing uncertainty to exist without rushing to catastrophic conclusions, great maturity in realizing that thoughts are influenced by countless invisible forces and therefore deserve reflection, not blind obedience. This does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming intentional. You are no longer dragged around by every passing mental wave. You begin choosing what deserves your energy. You begin noticing which thoughts create clarity and which thoughts only create suffering. You begin recognizing the difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection leads toward understanding. Rumination traps you in circles, and often the key difference is whether you are observing thoughts calmly or automatically believing every painful sentence the mind produces. One path creates wisdom, the other creates exhaustion. Perhaps this is why so many people feel mentally tired all the time. They are carrying every thought as if it were a stone that must be held forever. They do not know they are allowed to set some thoughts down. They do not know they are allowed to question fear. They do not know they are allowed to say, "This thought may simply be passing through." But you are allowed. You are allowed to listen without surrendering, allowed to observe without collapsing, allowed to feel without immediately creating an identity from the feeling, allowed to experience thoughts without turning every one of them into truth. This is one of the quietest freedoms a human being can discover, because eventually you realize something life-changing. Your thoughts are speaking to you, but they are not always speaking for you. And when that understanding finally settles into the heart, the mind begins losing some of its frightening power. The noise becomes less absolute. The fear becomes less convincing. The storms become more survivable. Not because you became emotionless, not because your mind became perfectly silent, but because you finally learned the rare peace of listening without immediately believing everything you hear inside yourself. And once you begin learning how to listen to your mind without immediately believing every fearful thought, another painful pattern slowly reveals itself. Many people are not only suffering from inner conflict, they are suffering because they have turned that conflict into evidence that something is wrong with them. The moment confusion appears, they call themselves broken. The moment fear returns, they decide they are failing. The moment old emotions rise again, they assume all their progress was fake. This is where so much hidden pain begins, not inside the conflict itself, but inside the meaning people attach to it. There is a quiet heartbreak that happens when a person believes they must always feel certain, calm, confident, and emotionally stable in order to be worthy of peace. The moment their inner world becomes messy, they panic. The moment contradiction appears, they think they are losing themselves. They do not see inner conflict as part of being human. They see it as proof of personal failure. But the human mind was never designed to move through life without conflict. A person can love someone deeply and still feel angry at them sometimes. A person can be grateful for life and still feel tired. A person can heal enormously and still have difficult days. A person can know the right decision logically and still feel emotionally afraid to make it. None of these things make you weak. They make you human. Yet many people secretly believe they should have already outgrown their struggles completely. They think healing means never doubting again, never overthinking again, never feeling anxious again, never getting emotionally overwhelmed again. So when normal human emotions return, they immediately assume they have failed. This creates enormous emotional pressure. Now every difficult feeling becomes more than a feeling. It becomes a verdict. Sadness becomes, "I am not getting better." Fear becomes, "I am mentally weak." Confusion becomes, "I do not know who I am." Stress becomes, "I cannot handle life." And because the mind attaches identity to temporary emotional states, people begin carrying shame for experiences that were never meant to define them. This is one of the cruelest things the inner critic does. It takes ordinary human struggle and turns it into character assassination. You feel tired for a week, and suddenly the mind says, "You are lazy." You feel uncertain during a hard season, and the mind says, "You are lost." You make a mistake, and the mind says, "You ruin everything." You have one emotional relapse, and the mind whispers, "You will never change." The mind often speaks in absolutes during emotional pain. Always, never, everyone, no one, forever, completely. These words feel convincing when emotions are heavy, but emotional pain often narrows perception. It reduces the enormous complexity of a human life into one painful conclusion. And this is where self-reconciliation becomes deeply important, because reconciliation teaches you to stop treating inner struggle as proof of personal failure. There is a major difference between experiencing conflict and becoming defined by it. A person can feel fear without becoming a fearful person. A person can experience confusion without becoming lost forever. A person can struggle emotionally without being broken. A person can carry wounds without being ruined. But when someone constantly interprets every emotional difficulty as evidence against themselves, the suffering multiplies. Now they are not only carrying pain, they are carrying shame about the pain, and shame changes everything. Pain says, "This hurts." Shame says, "Something is wrong with me for hurting." Pain seeks care, shame seeks hiding. This is why many people become trapped inside emotional isolation. They do not just want relief from their thoughts, they want relief from the belief that their thoughts make them defective. There are people walking around every day smiling politely while secretly feeling ashamed of their own mind, ashamed of how much they overthink, ashamed of how emotional they are, ashamed of how hard it is for them to feel calm, ashamed that old wounds still affect them, ashamed that healing is taking longer than they expected. But healing is not a straight staircase. It moves in circles sometimes. There are days when you feel strong and clear. Then suddenly an old emotion returns, and it feels as though you went backward. But going backward, emotionally, does not always mean you are failing. Sometimes it means deeper layers are finally surfacing. A wound can only heal properly once it is allowed into awareness. This is why emotional resurfacing is often misunderstood. People think the return of pain means the absence of healing, but often the opposite is true. Sometimes the nervous system only releases deeper feelings once it finally feels safe enough to process them. A person who was emotionally numb for years may suddenly begin feeling sadness intensely. They think something is wrong because they are crying more than before. But perhaps numbness was never peace. Perhaps it was survival. A person who always stayed emotionally strong may suddenly feel exhausted and vulnerable. They think they are becoming weaker, but perhaps their body is finally admitting how much pressure it has been carrying for years. Inner conflict does not automatically mean collapse. Sometimes it means honesty is beginning. Many people spent so much of their lives trying to appear fine that they forgot how to recognize authentic emotional movement. They learned to measure success by emotional control. Calm meant success. Emotional struggle meant failure. But emotional suppression is not the same as emotional health. A silent mind is not always a peaceful mind. Sometimes silence is exhaustion. Sometimes silence is disconnection. Sometimes silence is emotional shutdown. Real healing is not becoming incapable of struggle. It is becoming capable of meeting struggle without turning against yourself. This is a massive difference. One path creates shame. The other creates resilience. Resilience is not the absence of inner conflict. Resilience is the ability to move through inner conflict without losing compassion for yourself. And compassion becomes difficult when perfectionism controls your inner standards. Perfectionism is not only about achievement. Many people have emotional perfectionism. They believe they should always think correctly, respond maturely, heal quickly, stay positive, and remain emotionally balanced all the time. So when life naturally disrupts them, they feel embarrassed by their humanity. But the mind cannot heal properly under constant judgment. Think about how exhausting it is to live every day feeling emotionally monitored by yourself. Every reaction is analyzed. Every feeling is questioned. Every difficult moment becomes evidence in an invisible trial happening inside your head. How are you still struggling with this? Why can't you just move on? You should know better by now. You were doing so well. These sentences may sound motivating on the surface, but beneath them is rejection. They imply that your worth depends on how perfectly you manage your emotions, and this creates fear around imperfection. A person becomes terrified of their own emotional setbacks because they think setbacks destroy their value, but setbacks are part of growth. Even nature moves through cycles. Trees lose leaves, storms return, seasons shift, the ocean rises and falls. Nothing alive moves in perfect straight lines. Why would healing be any different? Yet modern culture quietly teaches people that emotional struggle should be solved quickly. Everyone wants transformation immediately. Fix the anxiety, heal the trauma, become confident, become peaceful, become productive, become emotionally optimized. And when real human healing takes time, people start feeling defective. But healing is not a machine repair, it is a relationship. A relationship between awareness, pain, memory, nervous system, identity, compassion, and time. Some parts of you learned fear slowly. They may also learn safety slowly. Some wounds formed over decades. They may not disappear in one season. This does not mean you are failing. It means you are alive. There is also another hidden danger in turning inner conflict into personal failure. You begin fearing your own emotions so much that you stop being honest with yourself. You hide your sadness from yourself. You minimize your exhaustion. You deny your anger. You ignore your loneliness. You pretend you are okay because acknowledging struggle feels humiliating. But unacknowledged emotions do not disappear peacefully. They often return through the body, through tension, through irritability, through numbness, through emotional shutdown, through anxiety that seems to come from nowhere. The body often carries what the mind refuses to admit. This is why emotional honesty matters so deeply. Not dramatic honesty, not self-pity, honest recognition. I am struggling today. I feel overwhelmed. I am carrying fear. I feel emotionally tired. These statements are not weakness. They are reality, and reality becomes easier to work with once it is no longer hidden behind shame. One of the quietest forms of maturity is learning how to experience inner conflict without immediately turning it into a story about your worth. This requires emotional separation, not emotional detachment, separation. You learn to say, I am experiencing anxiety, instead of, I am broken. I am feeling uncertain, instead of, I am incapable. I am having a difficult season, instead of, my life is ruined. This may sound small, but language shapes emotional experience powerfully. The stories you repeatedly tell yourself become emotional environments. A mind constantly told, you are failing, eventually begins living under emotional punishment. A mind told, you are human and learning, relaxes enough to grow. This is one reason why self-compassion is not weakness. Research from psychologists like Kristin Neff has repeatedly shown that self-compassion actually increases resilience, emotional stability, and long-term growth. Harsh self-criticism may create temporary pressure, but it often damages emotional recovery over time. A person heals faster when they do not spend all their energy hating themselves for struggling, and perhaps this is something many people desperately need to hear tonight. Your inner conflict does not erase your progress. You can still be healing while struggling. You can still be growing while confused. You can still be moving forward while feeling emotionally tired. Human beings are far more complex than simple labels. A person can be wise and still have moments of insecurity. A person can be deeply loving and still carry anger. A person can be emotionally intelligent and still feel overwhelmed sometimes. Contradiction is part of being alive. But many people fear contradiction because they think consistency equals worthiness. So when conflicting emotions appear, they panic. How can I love this person and still feel hurt by them? How can I want peace and still feel angry? How can I know better and still fall into old habits? The answer is simple: because you are human. The mind contains layers. Different emotional parts move at different speeds. Logic may understand something long before the nervous system feels safe enough to fully believe it. A person may know intellectually that they are safe now, while their body still reacts from years of fear. That is not failure. That is healing happening gradually. One of the cruelest habits people develop is expecting emotional mastery before emotional understanding. They demand perfect behavior from wounds they have not fully listened to yet. But wounds do not disappear through pressure alone. Sometimes they need grief. Sometimes they need rest. Sometimes they need patience. Sometimes they simply need to stop being treated like embarrassing flaws. There is enormous freedom in realizing that emotional struggle is not evidence that you are behind in life. Everyone carries invisible conflict, even people who seem calm, even people who look successful, even people who give advice to others. Every human being contains uncertainty somewhere. The difference is that some people have learned how to hold that uncertainty without turning it into self-hatred. This is what self-reconciliation teaches. It teaches you to stop measuring your worth by the emotional weather inside you. A rainy mind does not make you a failed person. A difficult season does not erase your goodness. A painful memory does not cancel your future. An anxious day does not destroy your healing. The mind often tries to simplify identity during emotional pain. It says, if you still struggle, then none of your growth was real. But growth is rarely visible in the moments you feel strongest. Growth is often revealed in how you treat yourself during difficult moments. Can you remain gentle with yourself while confused? Can you avoid emotional violence during fear? Can you stay present during discomfort? Can you refuse to shame yourself for being human? These are deeper forms of progress than constant emotional perfection. And perhaps one of the most healing realizations is this: inner conflict often means you care deeply. People who feel conflict about their choices usually care about doing what is right. People who wrestle emotionally often care deeply about others. People who overthink are often trying desperately not to cause harm or make painful mistakes. Their problem is not lack of care, it is excessive fear around imperfection. This fear becomes exhausting because life itself is uncertain. No person can guarantee perfect decisions, perfect emotions, or perfect control over outcomes. Human life contains ambiguity, contradiction, complexity, emotional movement, and peace only becomes possible once you stop demanding impossible emotional standards from yourself. You are not a machine. You are not a robot programmed for flawless emotional performance. You are a living human being with memory, biology, emotion, nervous system patterns, wounds, hopes, fears, and changing experiences. Of course, inner conflict appears sometimes. Of course, emotions shift. Of course, difficult thoughts return occasionally. This does not mean you failed at healing. It means you are participating in the deeply human process of learning how to live consciously. Some of the kindest people in the world still struggle internally. Some of the strongest people still carry fear. Some of the wisest people still experience doubt. Wisdom does not remove humanity. It softens the relationship with it. And perhaps this is where true emotional maturity begins. Not when conflict disappears forever, but when conflict no longer destroys your sense of self-worth. You stop seeing emotional pain as proof of defectiveness. You stop turning difficult moments into permanent identities. You stop treating yourself like a failed project every time your inner world becomes heavy. Instead, you begin responding differently, with steadiness, with patience, with perspective. You begin saying, "This is difficult, but difficulty is not the same as failure." That sentence changes everything, because once failure is removed from the experience, space opens for understanding. Space opens for learning. Space opens for rest. Space opens for healing. And slowly, the nervous system no longer fears every emotional wave so intensely. The mind becomes less ashamed of itself. The heart becomes less defensive. You begin living with more honesty and less self-punishment. This is not giving up on growth. It is removing unnecessary cruelty from the process. Cruelty does not create transformation as often as people think. Fear may force temporary performance, but sustainable healing grows better in environments of safety, patience, honesty, and steady accountability. A tree grows stronger from nourishment, not from screaming at it to grow faster. The same is true for human beings. You are allowed to be a work in progress without calling yourself a failure, allowed to have complicated emotions without losing your worth, allowed to struggle without concluding that something is fundamentally wrong with you, allowed to heal slowly, allowed to carry conflict while still becoming wiser, allowed to be deeply human without turning humanity into shame. And perhaps tonight, this understanding can begin loosening one of the heaviest burdens you have been carrying. The belief that your inner battles mean you are failing at life. They do not. They mean you are alive, aware, learning, growing, grieving, adapting, and trying. And that is not failure. That is the difficult and beautiful work of becoming whole without abandoning yourself in the process. And once a person stops turning every inner struggle into proof of failure, another hidden tension slowly rises into view. Many people are not only exhausted because they feel too much. They are exhausted because they believe they are only allowed to feel one thing at a time. The moment two emotions exist together, panic begins. Love mixed with anger, gratitude mixed with sadness, relief mixed with grief, hope mixed with fear. The mind immediately demands a final answer. Which feeling is the real one? But human emotions were never designed to move in straight lines, and some of the deepest suffering begins when a person refuses to make room for emotional contradiction. There is a strange loneliness that comes from feeling two opposite emotions at the same time and believing you must choose one in order to be valid. It creates confusion inside the heart. A person thinks, if I still feel hurt, maybe I never truly forgave. Or, if I still feel fear, maybe I am not actually healing. Or, if I feel sadness during a beautiful moment, maybe something is wrong with me. But life is far more emotionally layered than most people realize. A person can deeply love their family and still feel overwhelmed by them sometimes. A person can finally leave a painful chapter behind and still grieve what it cost them. A person can achieve a dream and still feel strangely empty afterward. A person can be excited about a new beginning while simultaneously mourning the life they are leaving behind. These contradictions are not signs of brokenness, they are signs of emotional depth. Yet many people spend years trying to simplify their feelings into neat categories because complexity feels uncomfortable. The mind wants certainty. It wants emotional clarity. It wants to label things quickly so it can feel in control. But emotions do not always obey logic. They overlap, they collide, they change shape, they move in waves. And one of the forgotten practices of inner peace is learning how to let conflicting emotions exist together without forcing one of them to disappear. This sounds simple, but it changes everything. Because most emotional suffering is not created by feelings alone. It is created by resistance to feelings. A person feels sadness during a happy season and immediately starts fighting themselves. Why am I not happier? What is wrong with me? I should be grateful. Now, sadness is no longer just sadness. It becomes guilt, or someone leaves a toxic relationship and suddenly misses the person who hurt them. Instead of understanding this as normal emotional attachment, they panic. Why do I miss them if they treated me badly? Does this mean I made the wrong choice? Am I weak? But the heart does not instantly erase attachment simply because the mind understands pain. Human beings can miss what hurt them. They can grieve what was unhealthy. They can feel relief and sorrow at the same time. Contradictory feelings are not emotional mistakes. They are evidence that the human heart is complex. One of the hardest things for people to accept is that healing often contains emotional contradiction. A person may feel stronger than ever and still cry unexpectedly. They may know they are growing and still feel afraid of the future. They may finally understand their worth and still struggle with insecurity on difficult days. This does not mean the healing is fake. It means healing is alive. Many people secretly expect emotional transformation to feel clean and linear. They imagine one final breakthrough where all confusion disappears forever. But real inner growth is often messy. Some parts of you move forward while other parts still carry fear. Logic may accept something long before the nervous system feels safe enough to fully relax. This creates emotional overlap, and emotional overlap is deeply human. Think about grief. A person can laugh at dinner while secretly missing someone who is gone. They can feel joy during one moment and sadness the next. This does not mean the joy is dishonest or the grief is unresolved. It means the heart is capable of carrying multiple truths simultaneously. The same is true for healing, relationships, identity, change, forgiveness, and self-reconciliation. A person can forgive someone and still feel anger sometimes. A person can move on and still remember. A person can feel confident publicly and uncertain privately. A person can want connection deeply while also fearing vulnerability. The mind often sees contradiction as inconsistency, but contradiction is often simply emotional complexity unfolding naturally. There is also another hidden reason people struggle with contradictory feelings. Many were raised in emotional environments where only certain emotions were accepted. Maybe sadness was treated like weakness. Maybe anger was treated like danger. Maybe fear was treated like failure. Maybe vulnerability was mocked. So the person learned to suppress emotions that seemed inconvenient or unacceptable. Over time, they lost the ability to hold emotional complexity safely. They began dividing emotions into good and bad instead of seeing them as information. But emotions are not moral failures. They are internal experiences. Some are pleasant, some are painful, some are confusing. Some arrive together in strange combinations. But none of them automatically make you defective. The problem begins when a person starts emotionally policing themselves constantly. You should not feel this. You already dealt with this. You cannot feel both. Pick one. This internal pressure creates emotional fragmentation. Parts of the self become rejected simply because they do not fit the emotional image the person wants to maintain, and rejected emotions rarely disappear peacefully. They often wait quietly beneath the surface until exhaustion, stress, loneliness, or silence finally gives them room to rise. This is why emotional suppression eventually becomes heavy. It takes enormous energy to constantly push away feelings that want acknowledgement. A person spends years pretending they are fine while carrying grief in the background of their nervous system. They tell themselves they are over something while secretly feeling hurt every time the memory returns. They insist they are emotionally strong while their body quietly carries tension every day. The body remembers what the mind tries to silence. And eventually, unresolved emotions begin speaking through anxiety, numbness, irritability, exhaustion, or emotional shutdown. Not because the person is weak, but because unprocessed emotions still need space somewhere. This is where the forgotten practice becomes powerful, making room instead of making war, making room for the feeling without immediately trying to erase it, making room for contradiction without demanding emotional perfection, making room for complexity without forcing immediate resolution. This does not mean drowning inside emotion. It means allowing emotional truth to exist without punishment. There is deep wisdom in saying, I feel grateful and I still feel tired. I love this person and I still feel hurt. I am healing and I still have difficult moments. I am hopeful and I am also afraid. Those sentences create emotional wholeness. Wholeness is not emotional purity. It is emotional honesty. And honesty creates internal safety. Many people are frightened of emotional contradiction because they think contradictory feelings mean they are dishonest or unstable. But emotionally mature people often carry multiple truths at once. A parent may feel enormous love for their child while simultaneously grieving how exhausting parenthood can sometimes feel. A person may feel thankful for survival while mourning what survival cost them emotionally. Someone may finally achieve success and still feel disconnected from themselves because achievement does not automatically heal. Loneliness. These emotional mixtures are not abnormalities. They are part of the human condition. The problem is that modern culture often pressures people to simplify emotions into clear narratives. Happy or sad, strong or weak, healed or broken, confident or insecure. But real emotional life rarely fits inside those clean categories. Human beings contain layers, and the more deeply you live, the more emotional complexity you often experience. This is especially true for sensitive people. Sensitive people often feel emotions intensely and simultaneously. They can hold empathy and frustration together. They can feel peace one moment and grief the next. They can see beauty while still carrying pain. But because society often misunderstands emotional depth, many sensitive people grow ashamed of their internal complexity. They start believing they are too emotional. But emotional depth is not weakness. It simply requires better emotional understanding. One of the greatest forms of emotional maturity is learning not to panic when conflicting feelings appear. A person who lacks emotional tolerance often rushes toward certainty immediately. They need one clear emotional answer because ambiguity feels threatening. But emotional wisdom allows space for uncertainty. It says, I do not need to fully resolve this feeling tonight. I can let this emotional contradiction exist while I continue living. That kind of inner flexibility creates enormous peace, because much of suffering comes from emotional rigidity, the demand that emotions must behave perfectly, the demand that healing must look clean, the demand that every feeling must make immediate sense. But many feelings need time before clarity arrives. Sometimes the heart understands things in layers. Sometimes emotions untangle slowly. Sometimes contradictory feelings exist because different parts of your experience are equally real. You can miss a person and still know they were unhealthy for you. You can feel sadness after making the right decision. You can feel fear while moving toward growth. You can feel exhausted while still loving your life. These truths can coexist. And when you stop forcing emotional simplicity onto yourself, the nervous system relaxes. Because now feelings no longer have to fight for permission to exist. This creates emotional spaciousness. Spaciousness is deeply healing because it removes urgency from emotional experience. A person no longer feels pressured to solve every feeling instantly. They can sit beside emotion instead of wrestling it to the ground. This changes the relationship with the self completely. Instead of becoming a judge inside your own mind, you become a witness. You stop interrogating every emotional movement. You stop demanding perfect internal consistency. You stop punishing yourself for being emotionally layered. And this is important because many people secretly abandon themselves whenever difficult feelings appear. The moment shame arrives, they reject themselves. The moment fear appears, they criticize themselves. The moment sadness returns, they conclude they are failing. But emotional abandonment creates fragmentation inside the psyche. Parts of the self begin feeling unwanted. Certain emotions become exiled. Then those emotions often return louder because what is denied usually intensifies. This is why reconciliation requires inclusion. Not inclusion of destructive behavior, but inclusion of emotional truth. A reconciled person can say, "There is fear here. There is grief here. There is anger here. There is also love here. There is also hope here." Nothing needs to be erased immediately for healing to continue. This understanding becomes especially powerful during life transitions. Transitions naturally create contradictory feelings. A person moving toward a better future may still mourn the familiarity of the past. Someone leaving an old identity behind may feel excitement and grief simultaneously. Even positive change often contains emotional loss because every transformation asks something old to end. But many people interpret these mixed emotions as signs they are making the wrong choice. They mistake emotional complexity for confusion. In reality, complexity often means something important is happening. Growth stretches emotional capacity. It asks the heart to hold endings and beginnings together. This is why emotionally mature people are often more comfortable with paradox. They understand that human beings can contain contradiction without collapsing. The Stoics understood something similar in their own way. They did not seek emotional numbness. They sought steadiness amid emotional movement. Marcus Aurelius did not deny human feeling. He practiced observing emotional experience without becoming controlled by it. This distinction matters because self-reconciliation is not emotional suppression disguised as wisdom. It is emotional integration. Integration means no part of your emotional experience must be violently rejected in order for you to feel whole. There is another hidden piece in allowing contradictory feelings. It softens identity pressure. Many people exhaust themselves trying to become one fixed emotional version of themselves all the time, always calm, always grateful, always confident, always certain. But no human being lives there permanently. Even emotionally grounded people have moments of fear. Even wise people experience confusion. Even healed people revisit old wounds occasionally. The difference is not the absence of emotional complexity. The difference is the absence of panic about emotional complexity. A person becomes freer when they stop seeing every uncomfortable emotion as a threat to their identity. This freedom allows emotional movement instead of emotional imprisonment, because feelings naturally shift when they are given room. A person who allows sadness to exist often notices sadness, eventually changes shape. A person who permits fear without panic often discovers fear softens more quickly. But resisted emotions tend to harden. What is denied often becomes louder internally. This is one reason mindfulness practices can feel healing. They teach observation without immediate judgment. A feeling rises. You notice it, you breathe, you let it move without instantly building a dramatic story around it. This sounds small, but it changes the emotional atmosphere inside the body. Because emotional suffering often increases through mental narration. I should not feel this. This means something terrible. I need to fix this immediately. I thought I was past this. These sentences create pressure around natural emotional movement. But when emotional space appears, healing gains room to breathe. This does not mean becoming passive about harmful patterns. Some emotions do require reflection and wise action. Anger may reveal violated boundaries. Anxiety may reveal exhaustion or neglected needs. Sadness may reveal grief requiring care. But emotional wisdom listens first, before rushing towards self-judgment. And perhaps this is what many people never received growing up. Permission to feel fully without becoming condemned for it. Permission to experience complexity without being labeled dramatic or unstable. Permission to contain contradiction without needing immediate emotional resolution. This permission matters because emotional safety is foundational to healing. A person who feels emotionally safe within themselves becomes less defensive, less ashamed, less fragmented. They stop running from their inner world constantly. They stop treating emotional waves like enemies. They begin trusting themselves more deeply. Not because emotions become perfectly organized, but because they learn they can survive emotional complexity without abandoning themselves. There is also deep humility in accepting contradictory feelings. It reminds you that human beings are not simple creatures. We are shaped by memory, biology, relationships, nervous systems, losses, hopes, fears, dreams, disappointments, and love. Of course, emotions overlap sometimes. Of course, the heart speaks in layers. Of course, healing contains contradiction. This understanding softens the harsh demand for emotional perfection. And once perfection loosens its grip, something gentler enters the room. Patience. Patience with your own process. Patience with emotional uncertainty. Patience with feelings that have not fully settled yet. Patience with the parts of yourself still learning safety. This patience becomes deeply healing because many wounds were formed in environments where there was no emotional patience at all. People were rushed through grief, rushed through pain, rushed through healing, rushed toward performance, rushed toward appearing fine. But the soul does not always heal on command. Some emotions unfold slowly because they carry years of experience beneath them. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop demanding immediate emotional clarity from yourself. You do not need to have every feeling perfectly organized tonight. You do not need to force every contradiction into neat emotional categories. You do not need to solve your entire inner world before deserving peace. Peace often begins the moment you stop fighting emotional complexity itself. The moment you realize you are allowed to carry multiple truths at once. Allowed to feel uncertain and still move forward. Allowed to feel grief and gratitude together. Allowed to feel healing and pain in the same season. Allowed to be emotionally layered without treating yourself like a problem to solve. This is the forgotten practice. Not eliminating contradiction, making room for it with enough steadiness that it no longer terrifies you. Because contradictory feelings do not mean you are broken. They mean your heart is trying to hold the full weight of being human. And perhaps tonight, instead of forcing your emotions into perfect order, you can simply let them breathe beside each other for a while. The fear beside the hope, the sadness beside the gratitude, the exhaustion beside the love, the uncertainty beside the courage. None of these feelings cancel each other out. They are all part of the same human story unfolding inside you. And healing does not require choosing one emotion while destroying the rest. Sometimes healing is simply learning how to hold the complexity gently enough that your own heart finally stops feeling like a battlefield. And after learning how to make room for contradictory feelings without treating them like emotional mistakes, another hidden pressure begins to reveal itself. Many people are not only tired from their emotions, They are tired from constantly trying to understand everything perfectly before allowing themselves to feel at peace. They believe they must fully figure themselves out before they can finally rest. Every feeling must be explained, every thought must make sense, every uncertainty must be solved, and because life rarely gives complete clarity, the mind becomes trapped in endless searching. There is a quiet kind of suffering that comes from needing absolute certainty before you feel safe inside yourself. The mind keeps asking questions without end. Why am I like this? What exactly is wrong with me? What if I am missing something important? What if I make the wrong decision? What if I never fully heal? And beneath all these questions is one deeper fear, the fear that uncertainty itself is dangerous. This is why many people live in constant mental tension. They are not only trying to heal, they are trying to eliminate every unknown part of life. They want emotional clarity before taking action. They want certainty before trusting themselves. They want guarantees before allowing their heart to relax. But life does not work that way. Some seasons arrive without explanation. Some emotions remain partially unresolved for a while. Some questions do not receive immediate answers. And some parts of healing only become understandable after you have already walked through them. Yet the mind often refuses to accept this. It believes uncertainty means something is wrong, so it keeps searching obsessively for the perfect explanation that will finally remove all discomfort. This is where overthinking quietly takes control of a person's life. Overthinking is often misunderstood as simply thinking too much. But deeper than that, overthinking is usually an attempt to create emotional safety through total understanding. The person believes that if they can just analyze enough, predict enough, understand enough, prepare enough, then finally they will feel calm. But the tragedy is that the search for perfect clarity often creates more confusion, because the mind keeps moving the finish line. One answer creates 5 new questions. One realization creates another layer of doubt. One moment of certainty disappears the moment fear returns. And eventually the person becomes mentally exhausted, not because they are incapable of peace, but because they are demanding impossible levels of clarity from a deeply human life. Human beings are not mathematical equations. The heart does not always move logically. Healing does not always unfold neatly, and life itself contains mystery. But many people secretly treat uncertainty like failure. If they do not fully understand their emotions, they panic. If they do not know exactly what the future holds, they become restless. If they cannot perfectly explain why they feel the way they do, they become frustrated with themselves. This creates enormous pressure inside the mind. The person becomes emotionally interrogative all the time. Why am I still sad? Why do I feel both hope and fear? Why can't I just know what I want? Why am I confused? But confusion is not always dysfunction. Sometimes confusion is simply part of transition. A person moving from one version of themselves into another often feels uncertain for a while. Old identities loosen before new ones fully form. Old beliefs collapse before deeper understanding emerges. Emotional clarity may temporarily disappear while the inner world reorganizes itself. But many people misinterpret this natural process as failure. They think peace only belongs to people who have everything figured out. Yet some of the calmest people in the world are not people with perfect certainty. They are people who learned how to live gently beside uncertainty. This is one of the hidden foundations of self-reconciliation, the ability to stop demanding complete clarity before allowing yourself compassion. There is deep emotional freedom in admitting, I do not fully understand everything I feel right now, and that is okay. That sentence softens enormous amounts of internal pressure, because now your nervous system no longer has to solve your entire existence tonight in order to deserve rest. Many people unknowingly live as if their mind is a courtroom where every feeling must defend itself logically before being accepted. If the emotion cannot be perfectly explained, they become suspicious of it. If the future cannot be predicted clearly, they panic. But life often asks us to walk through uncertainty without complete understanding. Even the biggest decisions in life rarely come with total clarity. Love does not. Healing does not. Purpose does not. Growth does not. There are moments when you simply move forward with partial understanding and trust that deeper clarity will unfold later. This terrifies the controlling mind because control wants guarantees. It wants certainty before movement. It wants emotional proof before trust. But peace grows differently. Peace often grows through learning how to remain steady even when everything is not fully clear yet. This is why self-reconciliation begins when you stop treating uncertainty like an emergency. A person who fears uncertainty becomes trapped in constant mental checking. They repeatedly analyze their emotions, repeatedly question their choices, repeatedly revisit conversations, repeatedly search for hidden meanings, repeatedly ask themselves whether they are healing correctly. But emotional life cannot always be managed through endless analysis. Sometimes the deepest healing happens when the mind finally stops trying to force certainty from every corner of existence. There is also another hidden problem with demanding perfect clarity. It creates fear around imperfect emotions. A person believes they must completely understand why they feel hurt before allowing themselves to rest. Or they think they must fully resolve every emotional contradiction before moving forward. So instead of living, they stay mentally stuck inside endless inner investigation. But not every emotion arrives with immediate explanation. Sometimes sadness appears before understanding. Sometimes exhaustion appears before awareness. Sometimes the body recognizes something long before the conscious mind fully understands it. The nervous system often speaks through feeling before logic catches up. This is especially true for people who ignored themselves emotionally for years. Once they finally slow down, emotions begin surfacing in layers. But because they cannot instantly explain every feeling, they panic. What is happening to me? But healing is not always immediately understandable while it is happening. A seed underground does not look organized while it is breaking open. Yet transformation is still taking place beneath the surface. Human beings often demand visible clarity from invisible inner processes, and this creates impatience with the self. A person wants immediate answers to wounds that formed over decades, immediate peace after years of survival mode, immediate certainty after long emotional confusion. But deep inner healing often unfolds gradually and quietly. The mind may not fully understand everything immediately, and that does not mean healing is absent. There are seasons in life where clarity comes afterward, not before. You understand the lesson later. You understand the purpose later. You understand why something ended later. You understand why you needed rest later. You understand why your heart resisted something later. But many people become emotionally violent toward themselves during the period before understanding arrives. They think uncertainty itself means danger. This fear creates a constant pressure to figure yourself out. Modern culture intensifies this problem. Everywhere people are told to optimize themselves constantly. Know your purpose immediately. Know exactly who you are. Heal quickly. Become emotionally intelligent instantly. Have clear goals. Have clear identity. Have clear direction. But real human growth is often much slower and more mysterious than that. Sometimes you discover who you are by living, not by endlessly analyzing yourself. Sometimes clarity emerges through experience, not through obsessive thinking. Sometimes the mind becomes clearer only after the nervous system finally rests. And perhaps this is why exhausted people often struggle to find clarity. A tired mind cannot always think clearly. Chronic stress narrows perception, fear distorts perspective, overanalysis creates mental fog. Yet instead of resting, many people push harder. They stay awake mentally all night trying to solve themselves. They replay conversations endlessly. They analyze every emotion. They demand certainty immediately. But the harder they force clarity, the more overwhelmed the mind becomes. This is similar to muddy water. The harder you stir muddy water, trying to clear it quickly, the cloudier it becomes. But when left still for a while, the dirt naturally begins settling. The same is often true for the human mind. Some clarity arrives through stillness, not force. Some understanding emerges through patience, not obsession. Some emotional truths reveal themselves only after enough space exists inside the nervous system. But this requires trust, and trust is difficult for people who learned that uncertainty was unsafe. Perhaps they grew up in chaotic environments where unpredictability caused pain. Maybe they learned they had to constantly analyze everything to protect themselves emotionally. Maybe overthinking became a survival strategy. This is important to understand because many people are not controlling by nature. They became controlling because uncertainty once hurt them. A child growing up around emotional unpredictability often becomes hypervigilant. They monitor moods. They search for signs of danger. They overanalyze behavior. Over time, the nervous system learns that constant mental scanning equals safety. But later in life, this same pattern creates suffering. Now, the person cannot relax internally unless everything feels emotionally resolved. But life itself is unresolved much of the time. No one knows the future fully. No one understands themselves perfectly. No one maintains constant emotional certainty. The people who find deeper peace are often not those with the most answers. They are those who stopped demanding impossible levels of certainty from life itself. This does not mean becoming careless or passive. It means becoming emotionally flexible enough to tolerate ambiguity without collapsing into panic. That flexibility changes everything. Now, confusion does not automatically mean disaster. Uncertainty does not automatically mean failure. A difficult emotional season does not automatically mean you are lost forever. This creates psychological breathing room. Breathing room allows the nervous system to settle, and a settled nervous system often sees more clearly than a panicked one. Many people try to think their way into peace when what they truly need is nervous system safety. A frightened mind keeps searching because it believes one final answer will finally remove fear forever. But fear rarely disappears through total certainty because life itself cannot provide total certainty. Instead, peace grows when you become capable of standing inside uncertainty without abandoning yourself. That is a very different kind of strength. A person who requires perfect clarity before feeling safe will suffer constantly because life keeps changing. Relationships shift, emotions evolve, plans fail. New chapters begin unexpectedly. Human beings themselves change over time. The need for total certainty becomes an impossible burden. But when you loosen your grip slightly, something beautiful happens. The mind softens, the heart relaxes, the body stops living in constant interrogation mode. You begin allowing yourself to exist without solving every mystery immediately. And this creates space for intuition, not anxious guessing, not obsessive thinking, real intuition. Intuition often becomes easier to hear once mental panic quiets down. A frantic mind confuses fear for wisdom. But a calmer inner environment allows deeper knowing to surface naturally. This is one reason silence feels uncomfortable for many people. Silence removes distraction. It exposes uncertainty. It reveals unresolved emotions. And without constant stimulation, the mind begins searching desperately for clarity. But silence also teaches something important. Not every unanswered question needs immediate resolution. Some questions can remain open for a while. Some emotions can remain partially understood. Some experiences need time before meaning becomes visible. This is difficult for perfectionistic minds. Perfectionism does not only demand perfect performance, it often demands perfect understanding too. The person feels they must fully understand themselves before they deserve peace. But no human being fully understands themselves all the time. The psyche contains depth. Memory, biology, unconscious conditioning, nervous system responses, old wounds, hopes, fears, instincts, contradictions, desires, and changing emotional states all interact continuously. Human beings are not static creatures. We evolve, and evolving naturally includes periods of uncertainty. There are seasons where you outgrow old versions of yourself before knowing exactly who you are becoming next. These seasons can feel emotionally disorienting, but they are not signs of failure. They are signs of transition. A caterpillar dissolves completely before becoming something new. During that process, there is no stable final form yet, only transformation unfolding invisibly. People experience emotional versions of this throughout life. Old identities collapse, old beliefs loosen, old coping patterns stop working, and before deeper clarity forms, there is often confusion. But confusion is not always something to fear. Sometimes confusion means the old story no longer fits. This is why demanding perfect clarity too early can interrupt healing. The mind becomes so desperate for certainty that it rushes toward premature conclusions. I must be broken. I will never change. This feeling means something terrible. But emotionally charged conclusions made during uncertainty are often distorted by fear. Wisdom allows more patience. It says, I do not need to know everything tonight. That sentence alone can soften years of mental tension, because many people secretly believe their value depends on how quickly they solve themselves. But you are not a puzzle that must be completed perfectly before deserving love, peace, or rest. You are a living human being learning through experience. Some lessons arrive slowly. Some answers unfold over years. Some forms of understanding only emerge after pain has softened enough for perspective to appear. This is why self-reconciliation begins when the demand for perfect clarity weakens. Now the relationship with yourself changes. You stop aggressively interrogating every feeling. You stop forcing immediate emotional certainty. You stop punishing yourself for not having every answer yet. Instead, you begin relating to yourself with more patience, more trust, more steadiness. You begin saying, I do not fully understand this yet, but I can still care for myself. I do not know exactly where life is leading right now, but I can still take the next gentle step. I do not need complete certainty in order to remain present. These sentences calm the nervous system profoundly because they remove impossible demands. The body no longer has to stay hyper-alert, searching for final answers constantly. This allows real rest to begin, and rest changes perception. A rested mind often sees what an exhausted mind could not. Many people believe they need more thinking when what they actually need is more softness, more breathing room, more silence, more trust in the unfolding process of life. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that human beings control very little ultimately. The future remains uncertain. Circumstances shift constantly, but suffering increases when the mind demands total control over what cannot be fully controlled. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to focus on what could actually be guided, his response, his values, his actions in the present moment. Not endless certainty about every future possibility, not perfect emotional clarity, not total control over life. This perspective creates freedom, because peace becomes rooted in presence instead of prediction. A person no longer waits for perfect understanding before allowing themselves calm. They stop postponing peace until all questions disappear. And perhaps this is one of the greatest emotional shifts a human being can experience, realizing that uncertainty itself does not make you unsafe. You can still breathe inside the unknown, still love inside uncertainty, still move forward without complete answers, still trust yourself while learning, still rest while life remains unfinished. This understanding softens the desperate need to constantly solve your inner world, and once that desperation loosens, something quieter begins appearing beneath the mental noise. Not total certainty, not perfect clarity, something gentler. A deeper trust that you do not need to understand every part of yourself perfectly in order to stop fighting yourself. That healing can continue even while some questions remain unanswered. That peace can exist even while life remains incomplete. That your worth is not measured by how quickly you untangle every emotion. And perhaps tonight, you can let go of the exhausting belief that you must fully figure yourself out before you deserve rest. Perhaps you can stop demanding absolute clarity from a deeply human life. Perhaps you can allow yourself to exist softly beside uncertainty for a while, not because confusion feels comfortable, but because you are beginning to understand something wiser. The mind does not become peaceful when every mystery disappears. The mind becomes peaceful when it finally stops treating uncertainty like an enemy that must be conquered before life can begin. And once you stop demanding perfect clarity from yourself, another shift quietly becomes possible. You begin realizing that maybe peace was never supposed to come from defeating your thoughts completely. Maybe the reason you feel so tired is because you have spent years standing against your own mind, as if every difficult thought were an enemy trying to destroy you. But the human mind does not become calm through endless resistance. It softens when someone finally learns how to sit beside it without fear. There is a kind of loneliness that cannot be explained easily. It happens when a person becomes uncomfortable with their own inner world. They may still function normally on the outside, but inside they feel emotionally unsafe with themselves. Silence becomes tense. Rest becomes difficult. Stillness feels threatening. The moment thoughts appear, the person immediately braces for conflict. This is how many people unknowingly live every day. Their own mind feels like a place they must constantly manage, control, monitor, or escape from. And because of this, they never fully relax inside themselves. They become mentally defensive all the time. A painful thought appears, and they immediately push back. An uncomfortable memory rises, and they panic. Fear enters the room, and they rush to silence it. Doubt arrives, and they begin mentally arguing for hours. Without realizing it, they spend enormous energy fighting thoughts that may not even require battle. This constant resistance creates exhaustion. Not because thoughts themselves are always powerful, but because resistance consumes emotional energy. The body tightens. The nervous system stays alert. The mind becomes hyper-focused on internal discomfort. Everything inside turns into opposition. But there is another way to relate to the mind, a quieter way, a steadier way, a way that does not require surrendering to every thought, but also does not require endless war against them. This is the art of sitting beside your thoughts instead of standing against them. And for many people, this changes their entire emotional life, because most suffering does not come only from thoughts themselves. It comes from the immediate reaction that follows them. The mind says, "What if something goes wrong?" Then the body reacts with fear. Then another thought appears. You should not be thinking like this. Then shame enters. Then panic arrives because now the person is afraid of the fear itself. The original thought may have lasted only seconds, but the resistance creates hours of emotional suffering. This is why fighting thoughts often strengthens them. Attention feeds mental activity. Fear intensifies focus. And the more emotionally charged a thought becomes, the more the mind keeps returning to it. But when you stop treating thoughts like enemies that must be defeated immediately, something unexpected happens. The emotional intensity begins losing fuel. This does not happen because the thought magically disappears. It happens because the relationship with the thought changes. There is enormous difference between saying, "This thought is here," and saying, "This thought is ruining me." One creates observation, the other creates emotional war. Many people never learned how to sit beside their thoughts because they were taught that difficult emotions should be eliminated quickly. Stay positive, stay strong, stay productive. Do not dwell, do not feel too much. So whenever uncomfortable thoughts appeared, they immediately tried to outrun them. But thoughts that are constantly chased often chase back harder. A person spends all day distracting themselves because they are afraid of being alone with their own mind. Music constantly playing, phone constantly scrolling, noise constantly filling the room, productivity filling every empty hour. And underneath all of it is one hidden fear. What if I stop moving and my thoughts catch me? This fear creates inner separation. The person begins living as if their mind is a dangerous place, but eventually every distraction becomes temporary. Night comes, silence arrives, the world slows down, and suddenly the thoughts return stronger because they were never actually understood. They were only avoided. Avoidance often creates accumulation. Unfelt emotions pile up quietly. Unprocessed thoughts gather weight. The nervous system stores tension that never fully leaves, and eventually the mind becomes crowded. This is why sitting beside your thoughts is not passive weakness, it is courageous emotional presence. Presence means you stop running from your own inner experience long enough to witness it honestly, not to drown inside it, not to obey every thought, not to analyze endlessly, simply to remain present without immediate resistance. This sounds simple, but for many people it feels terrifying at first because they are used to fighting themselves automatically. A thought appears, they tense, an emotion rises, they criticize themselves, anxiety enters, they try to force it away immediately, but sitting beside your thoughts asks something different from you. It asks you to stop reacting instantly, to breathe before interpreting, to notice before attacking, to allow space before panic. This changes the nervous system profoundly, because the nervous system learns safety not only from external environments, but from internal relationships too. A person who constantly attacks themselves internally creates an atmosphere of danger inside their own body, but a person who responds to inner difficulty with steadiness creates internal safety, and safety allows healing. This is why emotionally safe people often appear calmer even during difficulty. It is not because they never have painful thoughts, it is because they are no longer terrified of having them. There is freedom in no longer fearing your own mind. Many people secretly believe that if they stop fighting their thoughts, the thoughts will consume them completely. But often the opposite happens. The mind becomes less aggressive once it no longer feels constantly resisted. Think of quicksand. People panic and fight wildly because they fear sinking, but frantic resistance often pulls them deeper. Survival experts teach something surprising instead. Slow down, stop thrashing, spread your weight, work with steadiness instead of panic. The mind often works similarly. Frantic resistance increases emotional sinking. Steady observation creates space. This does not mean every thought is harmless. Some thoughts reflect deep pain, unresolved trauma, or distorted beliefs that deserve compassionate attention. But compassionate attention is very different from emotional warfare. War creates fear. Attention creates understanding. And understanding changes everything. A person sitting beside their thoughts begins noticing patterns that panic previously hid. They notice certain fears appear more strongly when exhausted. Certain insecurities grow louder after rejection. Certain old memories return during loneliness. Certain thoughts intensify when the body is stressed. This awareness creates wisdom. Now the person stops seeing every thought as objective reality. Instead, they begin recognizing thoughts as experiences influenced by emotional states, nervous system patterns, and past conditioning. This recognition softens fear, because fear often grows strongest in confusion. A person who does not understand their own inner world becomes easily overwhelmed by it. But a person who calmly observes the mind gradually becomes more familiar with its patterns, not controlling, familiar. That familiarity reduces panic. The same way storms become less terrifying when you understand weather patterns. This is why mindfulness practices have existed for thousands of years across different traditions, not because humans were trying to become emotionless, but because they were trying to develop a different relationship with thought itself. The goal was never perfect mental silence. The goal was freedom from automatic entanglement, freedom from immediately becoming every thought that appeared, freedom from emotional fusion, freedom from the endless cycle of reaction and resistance. Many people think peace means never having difficult thoughts again, but peace is often quieter than that. Peace is being able to sit in the same room as your thoughts without becoming emotionally destroyed by their presence. This is a profound form of strength, especially in a world that constantly teaches people to escape discomfort immediately. Discomfort itself is not always dangerous. Sometimes discomfort is simply part of being emotionally alive. A memory hurts because something mattered deeply. Fear rises because the nervous system learned survival through alertness. Sadness appears because the heart knows loss. These experiences do not make you weak, they make you human. But when the mind becomes afraid of its own humanity, suffering multiplies. This is why sitting beside your thoughts requires compassion, not indulgence, not helplessness. Compassion. Compassion says, "This is difficult, but I do not need to attack myself for experiencing it." That sentence changes the emotional atmosphere inside the body, because many people unconsciously believe harshness creates strength. They think inner cruelty will force them into healing faster. But shame rarely creates lasting peace. Fear rarely creates emotional safety. Punishment rarely creates reconciliation. A person heals more deeply when they stop becoming violent toward their own inner experience. And violence is not always loud. Sometimes violence sounds like constant self-rejection. You should not feel this. You are ridiculous. Why are you still struggling? You are too sensitive. These sentences create internal hostility. The mind tightens under hostility, but sitting beside your thoughts changes the tone completely. Now the inner response becomes softer. This thought is painful. I notice fear here. I feel overwhelmed right now. There is sadness moving through me. Notice the difference. No attack, no humiliation, no emotional abandonment, just awareness. This awareness creates emotional regulation naturally because the nervous system no longer feels trapped inside internal danger. One of the deepest truths about the mind is this: what is resisted aggressively often becomes more persistent. This is why people who desperately try not to feel anxious often become more anxious. The fear of anxiety adds another layer of anxiety. The fear of sadness adds tension around sadness. The fear of intrusive thoughts intensifies focus on intrusive thoughts. Eventually, the person becomes trapped not only by the original thought, but by fear of the thought itself. Sitting beside your thoughts interrupts this cycle, because now the thought is no longer treated like an emergency, and thoughts lose power when panic stops feeding them constantly. This process takes practice because many people have spent years reacting automatically. Their nervous systems are trained for inner combat. The moment discomfort appears, defense mechanisms activate immediately. Some people intellectualize, some distract, some overanalyze, some numb themselves, some become emotionally reactive. These responses often formed for understandable reasons. At some point, the mind learned that discomfort was unsafe. But adulthood offers an opportunity to slowly teach the nervous system something new. That difficult thoughts can exist without catastrophe, that feelings can rise without immediate collapse, that discomfort can move through the body without destroying identity. This is emotional resilience, not emotional suppression. Resilience allows movement. Suppression creates internal freezing. Many people appear calm externally while internally frozen. Frozen grief, frozen fear, frozen anger, frozen exhaustion. But frozen emotions do not disappear. They simply wait, sometimes for years. Then suddenly a small trigger awakens enormous emotional reactions that seem disproportionate to the moment. The person becomes confused. Why am I reacting so strongly? Often because the nervous system has been carrying accumulated emotional weight for a very long time. Sitting beside your thoughts allows emotional thawing, slowly, gently, without forcing. This is why healing cannot always be rushed. Some emotions need space before they soften naturally. Some thoughts lose intensity only after they stop being treated like forbidden enemies. A person who constantly fears sadness often becomes emotionally exhausted trying to avoid it. But a person who learns how to sit quietly beside sadness without drowning discovers something surprising. Emotions move. No feeling stays exactly the same forever. Even intense emotions shift over time when they are not constantly resisted or dramatized. This is important because many people secretly fear permanence during emotional pain. They think, I will feel this way forever. But emotional states are fluid. Thoughts move. Feelings evolve. Nervous systems regulate gradually. And often the mind calms not through force, but through safe observation. This is why breathing matters during emotional overwhelm. Breathing tells the body, we are still here, we are still safe enough to stay present. A slow breath interrupts panic's momentum. A grounded body helps the mind soften. The body and mind constantly influence each other. A tense body creates mental alarm. A calmer body creates more emotional space. This is why practices like walking slowly, sitting quietly, journaling honestly, resting deeply, or simply placing a hand over the chest during emotional overwhelm can feel healing. They communicate steadiness to the nervous system. Steadiness teaches the mind it does not need to scream for survival, and perhaps this is what many people truly need. Not more self-criticism, not more analysis, not more inner fighting, but a safer relationship with themselves, a relationship where difficult thoughts can exist without creating immediate self-rejection, a relationship where emotions are allowed to move without becoming moral failures, a relationship where uncertainty does not automatically create panic. This relationship changes everything because eventually the mind begins trusting your presence. Trust matters deeply. A frightened mind does not relax around hostility. It relaxes around steadiness, and steadiness does not mean perfection. It means remaining emotionally present without abandoning yourself. This is especially important during painful memories. Many people either avoid memories completely or obsessively relive them. But sitting beside your thoughts creates a middle path. The memory comes. You notice it. You breathe. You allow the feeling without becoming consumed by it completely. You stop trying to erase the memory instantly. You stop trying to solve the entire past tonight. You simply remain present long enough for the nervous system to learn, I can survive remembering without collapsing. That realization creates tremendous emotional freedom. Because many people are not only haunted by memories, they are haunted by fear of their memories. But feared memories often soften once they are no longer emotionally avoided. Again, not immediately, not magically, but gradually. The nervous system learns that presence is survivable, and this changes the relationship with pain itself. Pain stops becoming proof of danger. It becomes part of human experience moving through awareness. This perspective also softens perfectionism. A perfectionistic mind constantly evaluates itself. Am I thinking correctly? Am I healing fast enough? Am I emotionally stable enough? But sitting beside your thoughts removes constant evaluation. Now thoughts become experiences to notice rather than performance tests to pass. This creates internal rest, real rest, not distraction, not numbness, rest. And many people are far more emotionally exhausted than they realize because they have not rested mentally in years. Even during quiet moments, they remain internally alert, monitoring, correcting, analyzing, preparing, defending. The nervous system never fully relaxes because the person never fully stops fighting themselves. But sitting beside your thoughts interrupts that exhausting cycle. You stop trying to win against your own humanity. You stop treating every difficult feeling like an opponent. You stop turning your mind into a battlefield. And little by little, the internal atmosphere changes. Thoughts still come, emotions still move, fear still appears sometimes, but the relationship becomes less violent, less panicked, less exhausting. This is self-reconciliation, not the destruction of the mind, the softening of the war against it. And perhaps tonight, for the first time in a long while, you can let your thoughts exist without immediately standing against them. You can let fear speak without surrendering your life to it. You can let sadness pass through without deciding you're broken. You can let uncertainty breathe without demanding immediate answers. You can sit quietly beside your inner world without treating yourself like an enemy to defeat. Because peace does not always arrive through control. Sometimes peace arrives through companionship. The kind of companionship where your own mind finally realizes it no longer has to fight for permission to exist. And once that realization settles into the nervous system, even slowly, something inside begins loosening. The tension softens. The resistance weakens. The constant inner defense begins lowering its guard. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because you finally stopped standing against yourself long enough to sit beside your own humanity with patience instead of fear. And after learning how to sit beside your thoughts instead of constantly fighting them, another layer of inner peace slowly begins to reveal itself. You start noticing that not every painful feeling belongs to the present moment. Some emotions are echoes, old fears repeating themselves through new situations, old wounds reacting before the mind fully understands what is happening, old pain speaking in familiar emotional tones long after the original moment has passed. And much of human suffering comes from arguing with these echoes as if they are current truths instead of lingering emotional memories still moving through the nervous system. There are moments when a person reacts to something small with emotions that feel much larger than the situation itself. A delayed message creates panic. A cold tone of voice creates deep insecurity. A simple disagreement awakens enormous fear of abandonment, and afterward the person feels confused. Why did I react so strongly? Often because the present moment touched an old emotional echo. The mind remembers emotionally even when logic says the danger is over. A child who constantly felt rejected may grow into an adult who panics when someone becomes distant. A person who lived through betrayal may struggle to fully relax even inside healthy relationships. Someone who spent years criticized harshly may hear failure in situations where no one is actually attacking them. The emotional echo returns automatically, and many people spend years fighting these echoes instead of understanding them. They become angry at themselves for still feeling afraid, ashamed for still feeling sensitive, frustrated that old pain still appears. But emotional echoes are not signs of weakness. They are signs that certain parts of the nervous system still remember what survival once felt like. This is important because the body often carries emotional memory differently than the conscious mind. A person may logically know they are safe now while emotionally reacting as though danger is still nearby. The nervous system moves slower than intellectual understanding, and this creates confusion. The mind says, "You should be over this already," but the body quietly says, "I still remember." This inner conflict becomes exhausting because the person starts arguing with their own emotional reality. I should not feel this. This does not make sense. Why am I still affected? And each argument adds another layer of emotional pressure. But the quiet wisdom of healing often begins when you stop arguing with the existence of old emotional echoes. Not because the echoes are always accurate, not because they should control your life, but because fighting their existence often deepens the suffering. There is a major difference between acknowledging an emotional echo and obeying it. Acknowledgement says, "Something old was activated inside me." Obedience says, "This feeling must define reality." Wisdom lives between these two extremes. A reconciled person can notice old fear without instantly believing the present moment is dangerous. They can recognize emotional pain without collapsing into shame. They can feel the echo without becoming consumed by it. This requires patience because emotional echoes often feel very real in the body. The heart races, the chest tightens, the stomach sinks. The nervous system reacts before logic fully catches up. And many people panic during this process because they assume intense feeling automatically means present danger. But emotional intensity is not always evidence of current truth. Sometimes it is evidence of old pain resurfacing. Think about how certain songs can suddenly bring back forgotten memories. One sound, one smell, one phrase, and suddenly the body remembers emotions from years ago. Emotional echoes work similarly. Certain situations awaken old emotional patterns automatically. A person may feel abandoned during small moments of distance because the body remembers what abandonment once felt like. Someone may become defensive during harmless criticism because the nervous system remembers humiliation from years earlier. Another person may feel guilty whenever they rest because their body learned early in life that worth depended on productivity. These reactions often happen beneath conscious awareness. And when people do not understand this, they often become cruel toward themselves. They think, "I am too emotional. I am broken. I should not react this way." But emotional echoes are not personal failures. They are unfinished emotional imprints still seeking safety, understanding, or release. This is why self-reconciliation requires gentleness toward old emotional patterns instead of constant war against them. War keeps the nervous system activated. Gentleness allows the nervous system to slowly relearn safety. Many people secretly believe healing means never being emotionally triggered again. But human beings are not machines that can erase all emotional memory completely. Certain experiences leave deep imprints. Healing often means learning how to respond differently when old echoes appear. It means recognizing This feeling may belong partly to the past. That recognition changes everything, because now the present moment stops carrying the full emotional weight of old pain automatically. A person who understands emotional echoes becomes less reactive, not emotionless, less reactive. They begin pausing before concluding catastrophe. They stop assuming every emotional wave reflects objective reality. They recognize patterns. This fear feels familiar. This shame sounds old. This reaction reminds me of something deeper. That awareness creates space between past and present, and space weakens emotional panic. Without awareness, emotional echoes often control behavior automatically. A person becomes distant to avoid rejection before rejection even happens. Another becomes controlling because uncertainty activates old fear. Someone else withdraws emotionally because vulnerability once caused pain. The person believes they are reacting to the present, but often they are reacting to accumulated emotional history. This is why unresolved emotional pain quietly shapes adult life. Not because people are weak, because the nervous system adapts around survival. And survival patterns do not disappear instantly once circumstances improve. A person who grew up emotionally unsafe may still struggle to trust peace years later. Calm can feel unfamiliar to a nervous system trained for alertness. Stillness can feel uncomfortable to someone who spent years surviving chaos. This is one reason emotionally healthy love can initially feel strange to wounded people. Their nervous system is accustomed to emotional intensity, unpredictability, or hypervigilance. Peace feels unfamiliar, sometimes even suspicious. The old emotional echo says, "Stay alert." And if the person argues aggressively with themselves for having these reactions, shame grows. But shame rarely heals emotional memory. Safety does, consistency does, patience does, compassion does. This does not mean excusing harmful behavior endlessly. Emotional echoes explain reactions, but they do not remove responsibility for growth. Healing still requires accountability, but accountability without self-hatred creates much healthier transformation. A person can say, "This reaction came from old pain, and I still want to respond differently." That sentence contains both compassion and responsibility. Many people only learned one extreme or the other, either total self-blame or total avoidance. But reconciliation creates balance. You stop demonizing yourself for having emotional wounds, and you also stop surrendering your whole life to those wounds. This middle path creates emotional maturity. Emotional maturity understands that old pain can still exist without fully controlling the present. A memory can still hurt without defining your future. An emotional echo can still appear without becoming your identity. This understanding becomes especially important because old emotional echoes often sound convincing. A person abandoned emotionally in childhood may hear, "You are unwanted," inside moments that are not actually rejection. A person repeatedly criticized may hear, "You are failing," even while succeeding. A person who experienced betrayal may hear, "You cannot trust anyone, even around safe people." The nervous system speaks in familiar emotional language. And if you argue aggressively with these echoes, the nervous system often becomes more defensive. This is similar to trying to calm a frightened animal through yelling. Fear rarely softens through force. It softens through safety. The same is true internally. Old emotional echoes need steadiness more than punishment. They need recognition without panic. This is why mindfulness becomes powerful during emotional activation. Mindfulness allows you to notice what is happening internally without immediately becoming consumed by it. There is fear here. There is shame rising. This feels connected to something old. These observations reduce emotional fusion. You stop becoming the feeling completely. Instead, You witness it with awareness. Awareness creates room for choice. Without awareness, old emotional echoes run automatically. A person lashes out, withdraws, panics, overthinks, or self-sabotages without fully understanding why. But awareness interrupts automatic cycles. It creates the possibility of responding differently. And responding differently slowly teaches the nervous system that the present is not always the past repeating itself. This process requires repetition because emotional patterns formed over years often soften gradually. A person who lived decades in emotional survival mode cannot instantly become deeply regulated overnight. Healing is often the slow retraining of the nervous system. This is why patience matters so deeply. A harsh voice saying, "Why are you still like this?" only creates more fear internally. But a steady voice saying, "I understand this reaction comes from somewhere painful," creates emotional openness. Openness allows healing. Closed fear keeps wounds frozen. Many people carry emotional echoes they barely recognize because the original pain happened so long ago. Certain beliefs become woven into identity. I must earn love. I cannot trust people. I am too much. I am not enough. These feelings make me weak. The person may not even realize these are emotional echoes rather than objective truths. They simply feel normal because they have existed for so long. This is why self-awareness can feel painful at first. A person begins noticing how much of their current emotional life is shaped by old survival patterns. But awareness is not punishment. Awareness is freedom beginning. Because once you recognize an emotional echo, you stop automatically confusing it with present reality. You stop building your entire future around old emotional memory. This does not erase the feeling instantly, but it changes your relationship with it, and relationship matters. The mind often amplifies what feels resisted or feared, but what is calmly acknowledged often softens naturally over time. This is why arguing constantly with old emotional echoes keeps them alive. The person keeps reinforcing internal danger. I should not feel this. This means I am failing. Something is wrong with me. The nervous system hears attack. Attack increases defense. Defense strengthens emotional activation, and the cycle continues. But when you stop arguing with the existence of the echo itself, the nervous system begins lowering its guard slowly, not because the pain was imaginary, because it no longer feels emotionally exiled. There is deep healing in no longer treating your wounded parts like embarrassing problems to hide. Many people secretly abandon themselves emotionally whenever old pain resurfaces. They become impatient, critical, ashamed. But wounded parts often become louder when abandoned. This is true even in ordinary human relationships. People often repeat themselves when they feel unheard. Emotional echoes behave similarly. Old fear repeats. Old shame returns. Old grief resurfaces. Not necessarily to torture you, but because unresolved emotional material often seeks recognition and integration. Integration means the experience becomes part of your story without remaining an open wound controlling everything. A healed scar still remembers injury without remaining infected. Emotional healing works similarly. The memory may remain. The sensitivity may occasionally appear, but the reaction gradually loses its total power over your identity and choices. This is one reason forgiveness is often misunderstood. Forgiveness does not always erase emotional echoes immediately. A person may forgive someone intellectually while the nervous system still carries emotional caution. Healing sometimes unfolds in stages. The mind understands before the body fully relaxes. This is normal, but many people become discouraged because they expect emotional healing to happen instantly once they know better. The nervous system moves through repetition, safety, experience, and time, not just logic. This understanding softens self-judgment enormously, because now emotional echoes stop feeling like proof of failure. They become reminders of what the nervous system survived, and survival deserves compassion, not endless pity. Compassion. There is strength in recognizing that some parts of you learned fear for understandable reasons. The goal is not to hate those parts. The goal is to help them slowly experience safety differently. This requires presence. When emotional echoes rise, many people disappear from themselves emotionally. They distract, numb, panic, overanalyze, or self-attack. But presence says something different. I am here. This feeling can exist without controlling everything. This reaction makes sense given my history. I can breathe through this moment. These responses calm the nervous system because they remove emotional abandonment. The body learns safety through repeated experiences of non-abandonment. This changes emotional resilience profoundly. A resilient person is not someone who never feels activated. A resilient person is someone who can remain connected to themselves during activation. This connection creates internal trust. And trust matters because many people secretly distrust themselves emotionally. They fear their own reactions, fear their own memories, fear their own vulnerability. But sitting beside emotional echoes without immediate war slowly rebuilds trust. You begin realizing, I can survive difficult feelings without collapsing. That realization creates emotional confidence, not perfection, confidence. Confidence that emotions can move through without destroying your worth. There is also quiet wisdom in understanding that emotional echoes often fade more naturally when they are no longer fed by panic. The person who constantly fears anxiety becomes hyper-focused on anxious sensations, but the person who notices anxiety calmly without catastrophic interpretation often experiences less escalation. Again, this does not happen instantly every time, but gradually the nervous system learns new responses, and those new responses weaken old cycles. This process is deeply human. Healing rarely happens through dramatic emotional victories. It often happens through quiet repetitions of steadiness, one breath, one pause, one moment of self-compassion, one decision not to panic, one choice to stay present instead of running. These moments accumulate slowly, and slowly the emotional echo becomes less overwhelming, not erased, less controlling. The memory remains part of the story without remaining the center of identity. This creates freedom, freedom to love without complete emotional imprisonment by old fear, freedom to rest without guilt controlling every quiet moment, freedom to experience closeness without immediate panic about abandonment, freedom to exist in the present without constantly reliving the emotional atmosphere of the past. Many people are physically living in the present while emotionally reacting from old rooms they left years ago. Old classrooms, old homes, old relationships, old humiliations, old losses. The nervous system still remembers the emotional temperature of those experiences, but healing teaches the body something new. The danger is not happening right now. That sentence sounds simple, but for deeply activated nervous systems, it can feel revolutionary. Because once the body begins believing safety is possible again, the emotional echoes lose some of their urgency. They stop screaming quite so loudly. And perhaps tonight, instead of fighting every old feeling that rises inside you, you can simply notice it with softer eyes. Not everything that hurts belongs to this exact moment. Not every fear reflects present danger. Not every emotional reaction means you are broken. Some feelings are echoes from older chapters still moving through the nervous system searching for reassurance. And maybe peace begins not when those echoes disappear forever, but when you stop arguing with the fact that they still exist sometimes. Maybe healing begins when you stop treating your emotional history like an enemy to erase. Maybe wisdom begins when you can quietly say, "Yes, I hear the old fear. Yes, I recognize this pain. Yes, part of me still remembers. And I do not need to hate myself for that." That sentence alone carries enormous gentleness, because the deepest healing often does not come from conquering your wounded parts. It comes from finally meeting them without shame, long enough for them to realize they are no longer alone inside you anymore. And once you stop arguing with old emotional echoes, something even deeper begins to become clear. Not every thought that rises inside you is a truth asking to be believed. Some thoughts are pain signals. Some thoughts are the mind's way of pointing toward a place inside you that feels tired, threatened, unseen, or unhealed. And if you mistake every painful thought for reality, you may spend your whole life obeying wounds that were only asking for care. There are thoughts that arrive like facts, but underneath them is pain. A thought says, "Nobody really cares about me," but beneath it may be loneliness. A thought says, "I am not good enough," but beneath it may be shame from years of comparison. A thought says, "Something bad will happen," but beneath it may be a nervous system that has forgotten how safety feels. A thought says, "I always ruin everything," but beneath it may be an old wound still carrying the memory of being blamed too much. This is where many people suffer without knowing why. They believe the thought because the thought feels strong. They assume intensity means accuracy. They think, if this thought hurts this much, it must be true. But pain is not proof. Pain is information. Pain tells you something needs attention, but it does not always tell you the full story. A headache tells you something is happening in the body, but it does not automatically tell you that your whole body is failing. A sore muscle tells you there is strain, but it does not mean you are permanently damaged. In the same way, a painful thought may tell you there is emotional strain, but it does not automatically reveal the truth about your worth, your future, or your identity. This is one of the most freeing things a person can learn. Some thoughts are not wisdom. They are wounds speaking, and wounds often speak in extremes. They say, "always." They say, "never." They say, "no one." They say, "everyone." They say, "forever." They take one painful moment and stretch it across your entire life. One rejection becomes, "I am impossible to love." One mistake becomes, "I destroy everything I touch." One anxious day becomes, "I will never be at peace." One season of confusion becomes, "I have no future." But these are not always truths. They are often pain trying to explain itself with the only language it knows. Pain does not always speak gently. Sometimes it shouts. Sometimes it exaggerates. Sometimes it creates dark stories because it is desperate to be noticed. And if you do not understand this, you may begin building your life around sentences created by fear. This is why self-reconciliation requires discernment. You are not learning to reject every thought, and you are not learning to believe every thought. You are learning to listen beneath the thought. When the mind says, "I am not enough," you do not have to immediately argue or collapse. You can pause and ask, what pain is speaking through this thought? Maybe it is the pain of always having to prove yourself. Maybe it is the pain of being compared. Maybe it is the pain of feeling unseen. Maybe it is the pain of carrying standards no human being could meet without breaking. That question changes everything, because instead of treating the thought like a final verdict, you begin treating it like a doorway into understanding. A painful thought is often the surface. Beneath it is the wound. Beneath the wound is a need. And beneath the need is usually something deeply human. Safety, love, rest, reassurance, dignity, forgiveness, belonging, or permission to stop performing. Many people stay trapped at the surface. They wrestle with the sentence itself all day. Am I enough? Am I not enough? Is this true? Is this false? Why do I think this? but the thought keeps returning because the deeper wound has not been heard. It is like hearing a fire alarm and spending all your energy arguing with the sound instead of checking where the smoke is coming from. The alarm may be loud and unpleasant, but the point is not to hate the alarm. The point is to understand what it is trying to show you. Some thoughts are alarms. They are not always accurate maps of reality, but they may be pointing toward emotional places that need care. This does not mean you must obey them. An alarm can be sensitive. It can go off when toast burns, not only when a house is on fire. The nervous system can also become sensitive. It may react strongly to small signs because it has known pain before. So the thought may not be true in the present, but the fear behind it may still deserve kindness. This is the balance. You can say, this thought is not the whole truth, but the pain behind it deserves my attention. That sentence is powerful because it refuses both denial and surrender. Denial says, there is nothing here. Surrender says, this painful thought must be true. Wisdom says, something in me hurts, and I can care for it without believing every story it tells. This is emotional maturity. A person who lacks this skill either suppresses painful thoughts or becomes swallowed by them. They either say, I should not think this, or they say, this thought defines me. But the healed path is gentler and wiser. It says, this thought is here. Let me understand what it is connected to. Sometimes a thought like I am falling behind is not really about time. It may be about fear of being forgotten, fear of wasting life, fear of disappointing others, fear that your effort will never matter. The thought talks about success, but the wound is about worth. Sometimes a thought like, they will leave me, is not really about the person in front of you. It may be about old abandonment, old inconsistency, old moments where love felt unstable. The thought talks about the future, but the wound remembers the past. Sometimes a thought like, I cannot handle this, is not a true measurement of your strength. It may be exhaustion speaking. It may be the body saying, I have carried too much without rest. The thought talks about weakness, but the signal may be fatigue. This is why you must be careful with thoughts that appear during emotional pain. They may sound like truth, but they may be translated pain. A tired mind often speaks hopelessly. A lonely mind often speaks personally. An anxious mind often speaks catastrophically. A grieving mind often speaks permanently. A shamed mind often speaks cruelly. But these states do not always reveal reality clearly. They reveal the condition of the inner world in that moment. And once you understand this, you stop letting every painful thought become your master. You begin asking better questions, not why am I so broken for thinking this, but what is hurting beneath this? Not how do I destroy this thought immediately, but what need is hidden under this fear? Not what if this thought is true, but what part of me feels unsafe enough to believe this right now? These questions move you from panic into presence. And presence is where healing begins, because the mind often creates painful thoughts when a feeling has not been processed. If grief is ignored, it may become thoughts of emptiness. If anger is suppressed, it may become thoughts of bitterness or self-blame. If fear is denied, it may become endless predictions of danger. If shame is buried, it may become harsh inner criticism. The thought is not always the root. Sometimes it is the branch, and if you keep cutting branches while ignoring the root, the same patterns grow back again. This is why people can spend years trying to think positively and still feel wounded underneath. Positive thinking can help in small ways, but if it becomes a way to silence pain, it does not heal the wound, it only paints over it. A person says, I am confident, I am strong, I am worthy. These words may be helpful, But if the deeper wound still feels unheard, another thought may return later. No, you are not. Then the person feels defeated because the positive sentence did not erase the pain. But self-reconciliation does not depend on forcing happy thoughts over wounded places. It depends on learning how to meet the pain beneath the thought with honesty. If the mind says, "I am unlovable," the answer is not only, "No, I am lovable." Sometimes the deeper answer is, "A part of me learned to feel unwanted, and that part needs tenderness, not argument." That is a very different kind of healing, because now you are no longer fighting the sentence. You are caring for the wound that produced it. There is a quiet wisdom in understanding that the mind often uses thoughts to communicate emotional distress. It may not always speak clearly. It may use dramatic language. It may exaggerate. It may borrow old fears and present them as current facts. But beneath the distortion, there may be a real emotional need. This is why the goal is not to shame the mind for producing painful thoughts. The goal is to translate them. "I am not enough" may translate to, "I need reassurance that my worth is not based only on performance." "I will be abandoned" may translate to, "I need safety in connection." "I cannot do this" may translate to, "I need rest, support, or a smaller next step." "Everyone is judging me" may translate to, "I feel exposed and afraid of rejection." "I should be over this" may translate to, "I am tired of hurting and need compassion for the length of healing." When you translate thoughts this way, they become less frightening. They stop looking like enemies. They become messages from parts of you that may be clumsy, scared, and overwhelmed, but not evil. This does not mean every thought should be trusted. Some thoughts are distorted, some are repetitive, some are shaped by old wounds that no longer match the present, some are mental noise created by stress. But even distorted thoughts can reveal emotional pressure. A thermometer does not cure a fever, but it shows you something is happening. A painful thought may not be truth, but it may show you where the inner temperature is rising. And once you stop mistaking every pain signal for reality, you gain freedom. You no longer need to collapse every time the mind says something dark. You no longer need to argue for hours with every painful sentence. You no longer need to treat one thought as a prophecy, a verdict, or a definition of who you are. You can notice it. You can breathe. You can ask what it is connected to. You can respond with care instead of panic. This is how inner leadership develops. Inner leadership does not mean dominating the mind with force. It means becoming wise enough to know what kind of response each inner experience needs. Some thoughts need correction, some need comfort, some need distance, some need rest, some need to be written down and examined later. Some need to pass without attention, some need to be understood as signals from deeper pain. Not all thoughts need the same response. This is why self-awareness must be gentle and intelligent. A person who treats every thought like truth becomes controlled by the mind. A person who treats every thought like garbage becomes disconnected from themselves. A reconciled person learns to listen with discernment. They can say, "This thought is painful, but pain alone does not make it true. Let me look deeper." This protects them from two traps: blind belief and emotional rejection. Blind belief makes the thought king. Emotional rejection makes the wound lonely. Discernment creates a third way. You hear the thought, but you do not worship it. You notice the pain, but you do not become ashamed of it. You allow the signal, but you do not let it drive your whole life. That is peace with strength inside it. Many people have never been taught this. They were taught to either push through pain or drown in it. They were not taught to interpret it. So when painful thoughts come, they panic. They assume the mind is attacking them. But sometimes the mind is not attacking. It is waving a flag from a place you have not visited in a long time. Maybe the thought is pointing toward a boundary you keep ignoring. Maybe toward rest you keep postponing. Maybe toward grief you keep minimizing. Maybe toward a need you keep calling weakness. Maybe toward a truth you are afraid to admit. This is why it is important not to dismiss every painful thought too quickly. Some painful thoughts are distorted, yes, but they may still contain a signal. For example, the thought, "I hate my life," may not be a final truth about your whole life. It may be a signal that something in your current rhythm feels suffocating. Maybe you need change. Maybe you need support. Maybe you need more meaning. Maybe you need to stop living only for survival. The thought is extreme, but the signal may matter. The thought, "nobody cares," may not be objectively true. There may be people who care deeply, but the signal may be that you feel unseen, disconnected, or emotionally hungry for closeness. The thought, "I am useless," is not truth. But the signal may be that you feel powerless, underappreciated, or cut off from purpose. This is how healing becomes more honest. You stop accepting the cruel wording of the thought, but you still listen for the need beneath it. That is the rare balance. Because if you believe the thought exactly as it appears, you suffer. If you reject it completely without listening, the deeper pain remains unheard. But if you translate it, you begin healing. There is another reason painful thoughts should not always be taken literally. The brain often communicates emotional states through stories. If you feel unsafe, the brain may create a story about danger. If you feel ashamed, the brain may create a story about being unworthy. If you feel lonely, the brain may create a story about being unwanted. The story may feel real because it matches the emotion, but matching an emotion is not the same as matching reality. A dream can feel real while you are inside it. A fear story can feel real while the nervous system is activated. But once you wake up, or once the body settles, you may see things differently. This is why timing matters. Do not make final judgments about your worth during moments of emotional pain. Do not make permanent conclusions about your future while your nervous system is in alarm. Do not believe every cruel thought that appears when you are exhausted. Pain distorts perspective, and part of self-reconciliation is learning to protect yourself from the mind's harshest interpretations during your most vulnerable moments. There is great kindness in saying, "I will not decide who I am while I am hurting." That sentence can save a person from years of unnecessary self-punishment. Because many people form identities around thoughts they had during pain. A child gets ignored and thinks, "I am not important." Then they carry that sentence for decades. A teenager gets rejected and thinks, "I am ugly or unlovable." Then they organize their whole personality around that wound. An adult fails publicly and thinks, "I am a failure." Then fear controls every future risk. But these were not truths. They were conclusions made in pain. And painful conclusions often feel permanent because they were formed when the heart was open and defenseless. Healing means revisiting those conclusions with adult awareness. Not to shame yourself for believing them, but to understand why they were created. You were trying to make sense of pain. That is what humans do. When something hurts, the mind searches for meaning. And if no loving explanation is available, the mind may blame the self. This happened because I am not enough. This happened because I am hard to love. This happened because something is wrong with me. Self-blame often gives the illusion of control. If the problem is you, then maybe you can fix yourself and prevent future pain. But this kind of control becomes a prison, because now pain turns into identity. And identity becomes difficult to question. This is why some thoughts need to be understood as old pain signals, not present truths. The thought, "I must earn love," may come from years of conditional acceptance. The thought, "I cannot trust anyone," may come from betrayal. The thought, "I must never make mistakes," may come from harsh criticism. The thought, "my needs are a burden," may come from being emotionally neglected. These thoughts did not appear from nowhere. They were learned through pain. But what was learned through pain can be softened through safety, awareness, and repeated new experience. This is why your mind needs patience. It may still produce thoughts from old emotional maps, even after your life has changed. That does not mean you are failing. It means the mind is still updating its understanding of safety, worth, and connection. A map drawn during a storm may not show the land clearly. If you keep using that map years later, you may still expect danger where there is now peace. Healing means slowly redrawing the map, and this happens through repeated moments of discernment. The thought comes. You pause. You identify the pain beneath it. You respond with truth and care. Over time, the mind learns new pathways. This is not instant, but it is real. The brain changes through repetition. Emotional patterns soften through repeated safe responses. Inner trust grows each time you refuse to abandon yourself during pain, and slowly, painful thoughts lose some of their authority. They may still visit, but they do not rule. They may still speak, but you do not kneel. They may still signal pain, but you no longer confuse the signal with your identity. This is one of the deepest freedoms in self-reconciliation. You stop being ruled by the first thing your mind says when it hurts. You stop treating every painful thought like a courtroom sentence. You stop letting wounds define reality without question. Instead, you become a compassionate interpreter of your own inner life. You learn to ask, what is this thought protecting? What is it remembering? What is it needing? What pain is trying to speak through this sentence? And with each question, the war softens, because you are no longer attacking your mind. You are no longer believing every painful thought. You are no longer ignoring the wound. You are listening wisely. And perhaps tonight, this truth can settle gently inside you. Your painful thoughts may feel loud, but loudness is not the same as truth. Some thoughts are cries from tired places. Some are alarms from old fear. Some are shadows of past wounds moving through the present. Some are signals asking for rest, care, safety, or understanding. You do not have to hate them. You do not have to obey them. You can listen beneath them. You can care for what hurts without surrendering your life to the story pain is telling. And that is how the mind begins to heal. Not by being forced into silence, but by finally being understood well enough that it no longer has to turn every wound into a sentence against you. And after realizing that some thoughts are pain signals rather than absolute truths, another deeper lesson begins to unfold quietly inside you. The goal was never to silence your mind completely. The goal was never to destroy every fearful thought or eliminate every uncomfortable emotion forever. The real art is learning how to let the mind speak without handing it complete control over your life. Because the mind can speak loudly without being wise. It can speak urgently without being accurate. And many people suffer not because the mind speaks, but because they immediately obey everything it says. There is a hidden exhaustion that comes from treating every thought like an order. The mind says, run, and the body panics. The mind says, you are failing, and the heart collapses. The mind says, something terrible is about to happen. And suddenly the nervous system acts as though disaster is already standing in the room. Over time, a person becomes emotionally controlled by every passing mental storm. But the mind was never meant to become a dictator. It was meant to become a guide that still requires wisdom, awareness, and discernment. This is one of the most important emotional shifts a human being can experience, realizing that thoughts can exist without automatically becoming commands. A thought can speak without owning you. Fear can speak without directing your future. Doubt can speak without destroying your confidence. pain can speak without becoming your identity. This understanding creates enormous inner freedom because many people have unknowingly lived their entire lives under mental dictatorship. Every anxious prediction becomes prophecy. Every insecure thought becomes identity. Every emotional reaction becomes evidence. They never learned how to separate awareness from obedience. And this is why the mind feels so overwhelming to them. Because anything with total authority eventually becomes frightening. The mind says, "You are not ready." So they stop trying. The mind says, "People will reject you." So they hide themselves. The mind says, "You cannot handle failure." So they never risk growth. The mind says, "You should stay where it is safe." So they remain emotionally trapped for years. Without realizing it, they have handed their entire life over to fear-based thinking. But thoughts are not kings. Thoughts are experiences moving through consciousness. Some are helpful, some are distorted, some are wise, some are wounded, some are temporary reactions created by stress, exhaustion, loneliness, shame, or old emotional conditioning. This is why wisdom requires listening without immediate surrender. The mind is capable of producing beautiful insight and terrible misinformation in the same afternoon. One moment it says, "You are capable of healing." Another moment it says, "Nothing will ever change." One moment it sees possibility. Another moment it sees catastrophe. One moment it feels hopeful. Another moment it feels doomed. The human mind shifts constantly because emotional states influence perception deeply. This is why emotional maturity is not learning how to stop the mind from speaking. It is learning how to hear the mind without becoming controlled by every sentence it produces. There is a calm strength that develops when you begin responding to thoughts differently. Instead of instantly reacting, you pause. Instead of immediately believing, you observe. Instead of collapsing into fear, you breathe. This pause changes everything, because within that pause, choice becomes possible. Without awareness, thoughts control behavior automatically. A person feels anxious, so they avoid. A person feels ashamed, so they hide. A person feels afraid, so they stop moving forward. But awareness interrupts automatic obedience. The mind speaks, and instead of immediately kneeling to it, you simply notice. That thought is here. This sounds small, but it is revolutionary, because now you are no longer fused completely with the thought. You are witnessing it. Witnessing creates space, and space creates freedom. Many people are terrified of their own thoughts because they believe having a thought means they secretly want it, believe it, or will eventually become it. But thoughts are often much more random, reactive, and emotionally conditioned than people realize. The brain constantly produces mental activity, memories, predictions, fears, associations, imagined scenarios, old emotional scripts. This is part of being human. But the suffering begins when every thought is treated like absolute truth. A person has one insecure thought and decides they are permanently inadequate. One fearful thought and decides life is hopeless. One intrusive thought and concludes something is wrong with them morally. But the appearance of a thought is not the same as reality. Clouds pass through the sky without becoming the sky itself. Thoughts move through awareness in similar ways. Some stay briefly, some linger longer, some return repeatedly because certain wounds or fears remain emotionally activated, but none of this automatically means the thought deserves complete authority over your life. This is where many people become trapped. They think emotional freedom means never having negative thoughts again. So every time fear returns, they panic. I thought I healed. I thought I moved past this. Why is this still happening? But healing is not the permanent absence of difficult mental activity. Healing is developing a new relationship with mental activity itself. A relationship where the mind is allowed to speak, but not allowed to dominate everything. This distinction matters deeply, because trying to completely silence the mind often creates more mental noise. The harder people force thoughts away, the more aware of them they become. This is why anxiety becomes exhausting. The person is not only anxious, they are fighting anxiety constantly. They fear fear itself. They monitor every sensation. They analyze every emotion. They become hyper-aware of their own mental activity. Eventually, the mind feels unbearably loud. But what if peace does not come from forcing silence? What if peace comes from no longer being frightened by mental movement? This changes the entire emotional atmosphere inside the body. Now a fearful thought can appear without creating immediate catastrophe. Now doubt can arise without completely destroying self-worth. Now uncertainty can exist without triggering total panic, because the person finally understands something important. Thoughts are visitors, not rulers. This does not mean all thoughts should be ignored. Some thoughts contain important wisdom. Some reveal unhealthy patterns, some warn about genuine danger, some guide you toward meaningful change. But wisdom requires discernment, not automatic obedience. A healthy mind learns how to evaluate thoughts calmly instead of emotionally reacting to all of them equally. And this evaluation becomes easier when the nervous system is less afraid. Fear distorts mental interpretation. A frightened nervous system treats every uncomfortable thought like a threat requiring immediate action. But a calmer nervous system can pause and ask, is this thought actually true? Is this thought useful? Is this thought coming from wisdom or fear? Is this thought connected to exhaustion, shame, loneliness, or old emotional pain? Those questions create emotional intelligence. Without them, the mind becomes impulsive. Impulsive minds often mistake emotional intensity for accuracy. But intensity is not proof. A nightmare can feel intensely real while you are inside it. A panic attack can feel like death while the body is actually physically safe. Strong emotion affects perception. This is why thoughts created during emotional overwhelm should be approached carefully. A tired mind often speaks hopelessly. An ashamed mind often speaks cruelly. A frightened mind often predicts disaster. A lonely mind often assumes rejection. These thoughts may feel convincing because the emotional state beneath them is powerful, but feelings influence thinking. And once you understand this, you stop allowing every temporary emotional state to define your entire reality. This creates steadiness. Steadiness is not emotional numbness, it is emotional groundedness. Grounded people still experience fear, sadness, anger, insecurity, and uncertainty. But they are not dragged helplessly by every mental wave. They remain connected to deeper awareness beneath the thoughts themselves. This deeper awareness is quiet but powerful. It notices the thought without immediately becoming it. There is fear speaking. There is insecurity rising. There is shame moving through me. This kind of awareness softens emotional fusion. The person no longer says, "I am hopeless." Instead, they notice, a hopeless thought is appearing right now. That small language shift changes identity completely, because now the thought is an experience, not a permanent definition. This is one reason mindfulness practices are so transformative. They teach people how to observe thoughts without immediately becoming consumed by them. Thoughts are allowed to rise and pass naturally instead of becoming endless internal emergencies. And perhaps this is what many people have been missing their entire lives. Permission to let thoughts exist without treating them like commands. A fearful thought can exist without controlling your choices. An insecure thought can exist without destroying your confidence. An angry thought can exist without forcing harmful action. A doubtful thought can exist without stopping your growth. This understanding restores inner authority, not through domination, through awareness. Awareness becomes the calm center from which you choose how to respond. And this is important because many people unconsciously hand leadership of their life to whichever emotion feels strongest in the moment. Fear leads one day, shame leads the next, anger leads after that. Then exhaustion takes over. The person becomes emotionally reactionary because no deeper awareness is present to guide the experience. But reconciliation changes this. You begin realizing that the mind can speak while another deeper part of you remains steady. This deeper steadiness does not scream, it does not panic, it does not catastrophize. It watches, it listens, it responds carefully. This is the part of you capable of saying, yes, fear is here, but I do not need to obey it completely. Yes, doubt is speaking, but I can still move forward gently. Yes, my mind is predicting disaster, but predictions are not guarantees. This is emotional wisdom in action, and emotional wisdom becomes stronger through repetition. At first, the mind may still feel overwhelming because old habits run deeply. A person who spent years automatically obeying anxious thoughts will not instantly become calm overnight. But each time awareness interrupts automatic reaction, new emotional pathways form. The brain learns through repetition. Each pause matters. Each moment of non-reactivity matters. Each breath before panic matters. Each gentle refusal to believe every cruel thought matters. Slowly, the relationship with the mind changes. The thoughts may still come, but their authority weakens. This process resembles sitting beside a frightened child. If the child screams, you do not immediately burn the whole house down because of the fear. You listen calmly, you assess reality, you provide reassurance, you stay steady. The mind often needs similar leadership, not harsh suppression, not total surrender, steady guidance. This is why self-reconciliation requires both compassion and boundaries internally. Compassion allows the mind to speak. Boundaries prevent the mind from ruling everything. Without compassion, the inner world becomes emotionally hostile. Without boundaries, the mind becomes chaotic. Healing requires both. A person learns how to hear fear without letting fear decide their entire future. They hear insecurity without abandoning themselves. They hear sadness without concluding life is meaningless. This balance creates emotional adulthood. Because emotional adulthood is not the absence of difficult thoughts, it is the ability to remain grounded while difficult thoughts move through awareness. This becomes especially important during uncertainty. The mind hates uncertainty because uncertainty removes control. So the mind often responds by producing endless scenarios. What if it fails? What if I embarrass myself? What if I regret this? What if everything goes wrong? The mind believes prediction creates protection, but endless prediction often creates paralysis instead. A person waits for perfect certainty before acting, loving, resting, trusting, or changing. And because life rarely offers perfect certainty, the person remains stuck. But once you stop letting the mind rule through fear-based prediction, movement becomes possible again. You realize you do not need complete mental certainty in order to take the next step. Courage is not the absence of fearful thoughts. Courage is movement despite them. The mind may say, "You cannot handle this." But awareness quietly says, "Maybe I can handle more than fear believes." The mind may say, "Stay hidden." But awareness says, "Staying hidden is hurting me too." The mind may say, "Do not trust anyone." But awareness notices how loneliness is slowly starving the heart. This is the quiet strength of inner leadership, not silencing the mind, seeing beyond its loudest fears. Many people spend years trying to become mentally perfect before allowing themselves peace. They think they must stop all negative thoughts first. But the mind naturally produces contrast. Fear exists beside hope. Doubt exists beside courage. Grief exists beside gratitude. Peace does not require eliminating all uncomfortable mental activity. It requires no longer being enslaved by it. This realization softens perfectionism enormously. Now you stop measuring healing by whether difficult thoughts appear. Instead, you measure healing by how you respond when they do. Do you panic immediately? Do you shame yourself? Do you obey automatically? Or can you stay present long enough to choose differently? That is growth, not perfection. Growth. There is another important truth here. The mind often repeats what it has practiced most. A mind trained for years in fear will naturally produce fearful thoughts more easily at first. A mind trained in self-criticism will produce harsh inner commentary automatically. This does not mean those thoughts are your deepest truth. It means repetition-shaped mental pathways, and new pathways require patience. Many people become discouraged because old thoughts still return during healing, but the return of a thought does not erase progress. A healed person may still hear old fears occasionally. The difference is that the fear no longer owns the entire inner world. The thought knocks on the door. It no longer owns the house. That is freedom. Freedom is not mental emptiness. Freedom is inner sovereignty. The ability to let thoughts exist without surrendering your whole identity and direction to them. And perhaps tonight, this understanding can begin changing the way you relate to your own mind forever. You do not need to destroy every fearful thought. You do not need to eliminate every doubt. You do not need to panic every time your mind becomes loud. You can let the mind speak without letting it rule. You can hear insecurity without becoming smaller. You can hear fear without abandoning your future. You can hear old pain without turning it into permanent identity. You can hear sadness without deciding life is hopeless. You can let thoughts rise and pass without chaining your worth to every sentence the mind produces during difficult moments. This is not emotional weakness. This is one of the deepest forms of emotional strength a human being can develop. Because the mind will always speak in some form. The real question is whether you will spend your life obeying every fearful voice inside you, or whether you will finally become steady enough to listen without surrendering your entire soul to the loudest thought in the room. And slowly, quietly, with patience and awareness, you begin discovering something life-changing. The mind may continue speaking, but you no longer belong to every thought it says. And maybe that is the deepest truth hidden beneath all of this. The mind was never meant to become your prison. It was never meant to be a battlefield where every thought becomes a war, every emotion becomes a problem, and every moment of doubt becomes proof that you are broken. Throughout this journey, you have seen how exhausting it is to fight yourself endlessly. You have seen how fear disguises itself as self-correction, how the inner critic often hides old wounds, how shame keeps reopening the same pain, and how peace begins the moment you stop treating your own humanity like an enemy. Real healing is not becoming perfect. It is becoming safe within yourself. It is learning how to sit beside your thoughts without drowning in them. It is learning how to let emotions breathe without putting them on trial. It is understanding that you can still grow without hating the version of you that struggled. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a long time, you can stop asking your mind to become flawless before you finally allow yourself peace. Because reconciliation does not happen through force. It happens through understanding, through patience, through compassion, through slowly realizing that the voice inside you does not need more punishment. It needs rest. If this message reached something deep inside you, write, "I choose peace within," in the comments. Let that be your quiet promise to yourself tonight. And if this journey helped you feel even a little lighter, do not forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more deep reflections like this. There are still many conversations waiting to help you heal, soften, and reconnect with yourself again. Now close your eyes, breathe slowly, and remember this: you do not have to win a war against your own mind to deserve peace.